See, Martha Mercer slapped a sack of flour onto the trading post counter, looked the man behind it dead in the eye, and said, "That ought to cover her for the season." See, she wasn't talking about a cow. She was talking about her daughter. See, standing 3 feet away, hearing every word. Elowen Mercer was 17 years old, and she had learned a long time ago not to flinch. See, not in public, not where people could see. She stood with her hands folded in front of her, her eyes fixed on a knot in the wooden floor. See, and she breathed the way she always breathed when something was happening to her that she had no power to stop, slow, shallow, quiet as a mouse behind a wall. See, the flour was for winter. She understood that. She even understood why her mother had done it. See, what she could not understand, what would take her years to untangle, was how a woman could look at her own child and see a ledger entry. See, if you were sitting where Elowen was standing, what would you have done? See, before we go any further, if this is your first time here, welcome. See, stories like Elowen's are why this channel exists. See, hit that subscribe button right now so you never miss one, because we release stories every week that will stay with you long after the video ends. See, and when you're done watching, drop a comment below and tell me what city or country you're watching from. I genuinely want to know how far this story has traveled. See, now let's go back to that trading post. Because what happened next, what one quiet rancher did when he walked through that door, is the part nobody in that settlement ever forgot. See, the Mercer homestead sat 11 miles from the nearest town, which, in that part of the frontier, might as well have been another world. See, the land was flat and punishing good for nothing much except winter wheat and regret, and Martha Mercer had been farming it alone for 6 years, ever since Elowen's father walked out the door one February morning and never came back. See, he hadn't died, he'd just left. That was somehow worse. See, Martha had kept the farm running through sheer, grinding stubbornness. See, she'd worked her hands raw. She'd bartered and borrowed and cut every corner she could find. See, she was not, by any fair measure, a lazy woman. But somewhere along the way, Elowen couldn't pinpoint exactly when her mother had stopped seeing her as a daughter and started seeing her as a resource. See, another pair of hands, another mouth, yes, but also another back. See, another set of arms that could carry water before dawn and haul hay after dark. See, by the time Elowen was 12, she was doing the work of a farmhand. See, by 14, she was doing the work of 2, and Martha never said thank you, because in Martha's mind, you didn't thank someone for paying a debt they already owed. See, that was the world Elowen had grown up inside of, not a cruel world by the standards of the frontier she'd seen worse, genuinely, but a cold one. See, a world with a ledger where a heart should have been. See, the morning it all changed started like every other morning. See, Elowen was up before the sun. See, feeding the chickens. See, hauling water. See, stoking the fire. See, she'd burned her arm on a cook stove 2 years earlier, a long, twisted scar that ran from her wrist to just below her elbow, and she kept it covered even in summer because her mother had told her, without any particular cruelty, see, just as a fact, people don't like looking at that. See, it makes them uncomfortable, so Elowen kept it covered. See, she'd gotten used to the heat. Martha came in from outside with a look on her face Elowen recognized. See, it was the look she got when she'd made a decision and was daring the world to argue with her. See, "Get your good dress," Martha said. Elowen turned from the fire. "See, it's Monday. I know what day it is. Get your good dress." See, Elowen had one good dress. It was 3 years old, and the hem had been let down twice. See, she put it on without asking questions, because asking questions had never once changed what Martha had already decided. See, they took the wagon into town. Martha said almost nothing for the entire 11 miles. See, that wasn't unusual. Martha had never been a talkative woman, but there was something tight around her jaw that morning, something that made Elowen watch the road instead of the fields. See, the trading settlement of Hadley Crossing was not much to look at. See, a trading post, a livery, a small dry goods store, and a handful of other rough buildings arranged along a dirt road that turned to mud every spring and dust every summer. See, maybe 40 people lived within reasonable distance of it. See, everybody knew everybody else, which meant everybody also knew everybody's business. See, Martha pulled the wagon up in front of the trading post and set the brake with a finality that made Elowen's stomach drop. See, come inside, Martha said. Elowen came inside. The trading post smelled like leather and tobacco and dried herbs. See, the man behind the counter, a heavy-set man named Grover, who had run the post for 20 years and had opinions about everyone, looked up when they came in, and Elowen saw something flicker across his face. See, not surprise. More like the look of a man who had been expecting something and was now watching it arrive. See, Martha set her reticule on the counter. She didn't spend time on pleasantries. See, I understand Silas Rourke has been asking about household help, she said. See, Grover cleared his throat. Well, he did mention. His housekeeper moved back east after her sister took ill, so… See, I'm not here to discuss his housekeeper. Martha's voice was flat. See, I'm here about my daughter. Elowen went very still. See, she was standing close enough to the counter to hear everything, far enough away that she could pretend she wasn't listening. See, she looked at a display of tin cups on a shelf. She counted them. See, 1, 2, 3, 4. There were 7. Mrs. Mercer, Grover said carefully, I'm not sure that I… See, she's a hard worker. She doesn't complain. She knows how to cook and clean and manage a household. Martha folded her hands on the counter. See, I'm not asking for much. Just something to see us through the winter. See, we had a bad harvest. Grover looked uncomfortable. See, ma'am, Mr. Rourke isn't exactly looking to… He's a widower. See, he's alone out there on that ranch. He needs help, and we need something to get through until spring. Martha paused. See, I have some flour to contribute, as a gesture. That was when she put the sack on the counter. See, that was when she said the words. That ought to cover her for the season. See, Elowen stared at the tin cups. 1, 2, 3, 4. See, she breathed slow and shallow. She did not flinch. See, but something happened inside her chest, something quiet and irreversible like a thread she'd been holding onto for a long time, finally going slack. See, she'd known, in some part of herself she never looked at directly, that her mother saw her this way. See, had known it for years. But there is a difference between knowing something and hearing it said out loud in a room with a witness. See, there is a difference between suspecting you are a burden and hearing the price attached to that burden. See, a sack of flour. That was what Martha Mercer decided her daughter was worth for 4 months of work, shelter, and labor. See, Grover was saying something, stumbling through it, clearly not comfortable when the door opened. See, Elowen didn't look up right away. She heard boots on the wooden floor. See, heavy, unhurried. A man who moved like he wasn't in a rush to get anywhere but always arrived exactly where he meant to. See, Grover, the man said, Mr. Rourke. Good timing as it happens. See, Elowen finally looked. Silas Rourke was not what she had expected, though she couldn't have told you what she'd expected. See, he was tall not in a way that felt threatening, just in the way of a man who had spent years working outdoors and the work had settled into him. See, he had dark hair going gray at the temples, a jaw that needed a razor's attention, and eyes that were pale enough that the first time you looked at them you thought they were gray, and the second time you thought they might be green. See, he was 35 and looked like a man who had been through something and come out the other side quieter for it. See, he looked at Grover first, then at Martha, then at Elowen. See, she looked back at him for exactly 1 second before looking away. See, Martha launched into her pitch again, shorter this time. More efficient, the way a woman talks when she's rehearsed it and wants to be done. See, Silas listened without interrupting. He didn't cross his arms. See, he didn't lean on the counter. He just stood there and listened with the full weight of his attention, which was more than most people had ever given Martha Mercer, and more than anyone in that room had ever given Elowen. See, when Martha finished, the room was quiet for a moment. See, then Silas said, "All right." Martha's expression shifted, something almost like relief crossing her face. See, but Silas said, "I'd like to speak with her. She's right there." See, "You can speak to outside," Silas said. He looked at Elowen. See, not at Martha. At Elowen, if you don't mind. Elowen looked at her mother. See, Martha's jaw tightened. but she gave a small, sharp nod. See, Elowen followed Silas Rourke out the door. The autumn air hit her like cold water. See, she stood on the wooden planks in front of the trading post and breathed it in and felt, for one small second, like she might cry. See, she didn't. She pressed her hands together in front of her and waited. See, Silas stood a few feet away. He was looking at the street, not at her, and for a moment he didn't say anything. See, just looked at the street, like he was taking his time with it. See, then he turned to face her. "I want to ask you something," he said. See, "and I want an honest answer, not the one you think I want." See, Elowen waited. She blinked. "I'm sorry?" See, "Not what your mother wants, not what makes sense for the farm or the winter or any of that." He paused. See, "What do you want?" Elowen stared at him. Nobody had ever asked her that. See, not once, not in 17 years. People asked what she could do, what she was good for, what she was willing to take on. See, nobody had ever asked what she wanted. Her mouth opened and then closed. See, she stopped, tried again. Stopped again. See, she felt something embarrassing happening behind her eyes and pressed it down hard. See, "I don't know," she finally said. Her voice came out very quiet. See, "I don't think I know how to answer that." Silas nodded like that was a perfectly reasonable thing to say. See, not pity in his face, she would have hated pity, but something more careful than that. See, something that looked a little bit like recognition. See, "Fair enough," he said. He was quiet for another moment. See, "Then, is there anything you know you don't want?" See, that one she could answer. That one she had a whole list for. See, "I don't want to be somewhere that counts what I eat," she said. See, the words came out before she could stop them, and as soon as they were out, she felt her face heat. See, Silas didn't look away. "All right," he said. "Then you won't be." See, she thought he was just saying it. People said things to smooth moments over. See, she'd learned that young. But he wasn't reaching for smooth. See, he wasn't even trying to smile to make it easier. He just said it, the way you say something you mean, flat and plain, and then he turned and went back inside. See, Elowen stood on the planks for a moment longer. She pulled at the sleeve over her scar without thinking about it. See, a habit, like breathing, then she followed him back inside. See, what happened in the next 10 minutes shifted something in that room that all the people in it would talk about for years. See, Martha, clearly expecting negotiation, expecting back and forth over terms and arrangements, and the flower started to say something about the length of the arrangement. See, Silas stopped her with a look that wasn't unkind, but was very, very clear. See, "I'm not negotiating over her," he said. His voice was still quiet. See, it was the quietness that made it land the way it did. See, Martha's mouth closed. "She's not livestock," Silas said. See, "she's not a sack of flour either." He glanced at the counter where the sack still sat, and something moved across his face, not anger, exactly, but something in the neighborhood of it. See, "I'm going to take her to the ranch. She can look it over, decide if she's willing to stay." See, that's how this works. Grover had gone very interested in something on a shelf behind him. See, Martha was very still. "Mr. Rourke, I don't think you understand what I'm offering." See, "I understand exactly what you're offering," Silas said. See, and then, because he was that kind of man, the kind who said what he meant and didn't twist the knife, he left it there. See, he picked up the small crate he'd come in to collect, nodded to Grover, and looked at Elowen. "See, ready?" he said. Elowen looked at her mother. Martha was looking at the sack of flour on the counter. See, not at Elowen, at the flour, like she was already recalculating. See, Elowen picked up the small bag she'd brought with her, everything she owned that fit into a flour sack of her own, and she said yes. See, she said it to Silas, but part of her said it to herself. See, yes. She didn't know what she was walking into. She knew almost nothing about this man except that he had asked her one question nobody else had ever thought to ask. See, she knew the ranch was remote, that he'd been alone since his wife died, that people in town talked about him in the careful way people talk about someone they're not quite sure how to read. See, she also knew that her mother 3 feet away was staring at a sack of flour. See, and that settled it. Elowen Mercer walked out to the door of the Hadley Crossing trading post on a cold October morning with a bag that held 2 dresses, a comb, a worn-out pair of gloves, and no idea what came next. See, but for the first time in a long time, the no idea didn't feel like falling. See, it felt like something else. She wasn't sure she had a word for it yet. See, but she was going to find out. The ride out to the Rourke ranch took the better part of an hour, and Elowen spent most of it watching the land instead of the man sitting beside her on the wagon bench. See, she'd never been this far west of Hadley Crossing. See, the terrain shifted out here less flat, more roll to it, the grass longer and a different shade of yellow than the fields around her mother's homestead. See, there were trees along a creek line in the distance, cottonwoods mostly, their leaves already going gold. See, the sky was the kind of pale blue that only showed up in October, when the heat had finally given up and the cold hadn't fully committed yet. See, Silas drove without talking. She'd expected questions. See, most adults, when they found themselves with a child they'd just agreed to take responsibility for, filled the silence with questions. See, where are you from? How old are you? Can you cook? See, can you sew? What are you good for? The usual inventory. See, but Silas just drove, one hand loose on the reins, watching the road the way a man watches something he's seen 1,000 times and still finds worth looking at. See, after a while, Elowen said, "You didn't take the flour." See, he glanced at her. "No, my mother's going to be upset about that." See, probably. She waited for more. There wasn't any more. See, why didn't you? She asked. He took a moment with it. See, she was starting to understand that this was just how he answered things, not stalling, not performing thoughtfulness, just actually taking the time to say what he meant. See, because taking it would have meant agreeing with what it was supposed to represent, he said. See, and I didn't agree with that. Elowen looked back at the road. See, she turned the words over in her head the way you turn a coin over when you're not sure if it's real. See, she wanted to believe him. She also knew she was 17 and had spent her whole life being wrong about people she wanted to believe. See, so she filed it. She didn't dismiss it, and she didn't trust it. See, she just filed it somewhere she could reach later. See, the ranch appeared before she expected it to. It came into view around a long curve in the trail, a 2-story frame house, a barn that had been repaired enough times that the wood was 3 different colors, 2 smaller outbuildings. See, and a fence line that ran farther than she could see in either direction. See, it wasn't grand, but it wasn't broken either. It had the look of a place that someone had been taking care of for a long time alone, which was different from a place that had been left to manage itself. See, Silas pulled the wagon up in front of the house and set the brake. See, it's not much from the outside, he said, not apologetically. See, just as a statement of fact. It's fine, Elowen said, and meant it. See, he showed her through the house. The kitchen was large for a ranch house, with a good iron stove and more counter space than her mother had ever had. See, the front room had a fireplace and 2 chairs and a shelf of books that surprised her not because ranchers didn't read, but because there were so many of them, and they looked actually used. See, spine cracked, pages bent. Read books, not display books. See, then he took her upstairs and showed her the room. See, it was small. A window, a bed with a proper frame, a quilt that had seen better days but was clean, a chest of drawers, and a hook on the wall. See, that was all. Elowen stood in the doorway. She'd shared a sleeping space with the cold and the drafts and the sound of her mother moving around in the dark her entire life. See, she'd never had 4 walls that were only hers. This would be your room, Silas said. See, he was standing back, not crowding the doorway, not a shared space. See, yours. Elowen stepped inside. She set her bag down on the chest of drawers. See, she wasn't sure why she did it exactly, some instinct, some small staking of ground. See, she set the bag down and looked at the window and looked at the bed and felt something that was so unfamiliar it took her a moment to identify it. See, safe. Not safe like nothing bad could happen. She wasn't naive enough for that at 17. See, safe like she could hear herself breathe. Like the air in this room wasn't already owed to someone. See, she turned around. Silas was still in the hallway. See, he hadn't come in. He was leaning against the doorframe with his arms crossed, watching her with that careful look of his. See, it's a good room, she said. It's a small room. See, I've slept in smaller. She paused. I've slept in the barn. See, something shifted in his face. Not pity, she was watching for pity and ready to be cold about it, but something that looked more like the quiet anger of a man who has just learned something he didn't want to know. See, he didn't say anything about it. He just nodded. Supper's at 6, he said. See, you don't have to cook it. I'll handle it tonight. See, Elowen blinked. You cook? Well enough to keep myself alive. A pause. See, something that was almost a smile but dry and small. See, the bar isn't high. She didn't smile back, not because she didn't want to, but because smiling at people was something she'd learned to be careful with. See, smiles cost things sometimes. She found out at supper that Silas was telling the truth about his cooking. See, it was plain food salt pork, boiled potatoes, a heel of bread, but it was hot, and there was enough of it, and he put the same amount on her plate as on his without measuring or commenting. See, at her mother's table, Elowen had always gotten the smaller portion. See, not out of cruelty, Martha would have said, just practicality. See, they ate mostly in silence. Not uncomfortable silence, exactly. See, more like the silence of two people who didn't know each other well enough yet to fill it. See, at some point, Elowen looked up and found him watching her. See, she looked back down at her plate. You eat like you're expecting someone to take it, he said. See, not unkindly. Just noticing. She didn't answer, because there wasn't a good answer that wasn't also an indictment of her entire childhood. See, nobody's going to take it, he said. I know that, she said. See, all right, he said, and he let it go. She washed the dishes after supper because that was what she did. See, she washed them and dried them and put them away, and then looked for other things to do the way a body does when it doesn't know how to stop. See, she swept the kitchen floor. She wiped down the stove. See, she refilled the water basin. Silas came in from outside and stopped in the kitchen doorway. See, what are you doing? He asked. Cleaning up. The kitchen was clean when I left it 10 minutes ago. See, the floor, Elowen. He said her name the way you say something when you're trying to get someone's attention without startling them. See, she stopped sweeping. You don't have to do all of that tonight. See, it'll be there tomorrow. She held on to the broom. See, I don't mind. I know you don't mind. I'm telling you that you don't have to. He looked at her steadily. See, there's a difference. She understood in her head what he was saying. See, the gap between understanding something in your head and feeling it in your body, though that gap was 11 miles wide, and she didn't have a wagon for it. See, she put the broom away. She went upstairs. She lay in the bed with the quilt pulled up and listened to the sounds of the house settling around her. See, wind outside, the creak of the second step on the staircase when Silas came up, and then the quiet of him going into his room, and then nothing. See, 4 walls, a window, a quilt. She stared at the ceiling and waited for the catch. See, there was always a catch. She'd learned that the way children learn things, they're never taught directly by watching, by being the one it applied to, by the slow accumulation of evidence that nothing was free. See, not warmth, not food, not a roof. Everything cost something, and the longer the bill waited, the larger the interest grew. See, she fell asleep waiting for the catch, and she slept better than she had in 2 years. See, the first week was strange. Not bad. Strange. She was never quite sure what to do with herself, which was a feeling she wasn't used to. See, at her mother's homestead, every hour had been filled before she woke up for it. See, the schedule was its own kind of certainty, relentless. Yes, but at least she always knew what came next. See, here, Silas told her what needed doing on the ranch, and there was plenty that needed doing. She wasn't idle, but he also said, more than once in different ways, that he didn't need her to work herself to the bone. See, she didn't know what to do with that. She tried to comply. See, she did. But compliance kept slipping. She'd finish her actual work and then find herself doing extra hauling more wood than needed, mending things that weren't quite broken yet, polishing the cook stove until it reflected. See, her hands needed to be doing something. Her hands had always been doing something. See, stillness felt dangerous, like a held breath. On the 9th day, she came in from hanging laundry to find Silas sitting at the kitchen table with 2 cups of coffee. See, he pushed one toward the empty chair across from him. See, she sat down. She put her hands around the cup. He said, "I want to talk to you about something." See, and I want you to hear it before you decide it's a criticism, because it isn't. See, Elowen looked at him over the rim of the cup. "I've watched you this past week," he said. "See, the way you work, you know what I see?" She shook her head. "See, I see someone who's afraid that if they stop, everything good goes away." He looked down at his own cup for a moment. "See, I grew up with a man like that. My father. He worked from sunup to dark every single day of his adult life, and he worked my brothers and my mother the same way, and he wasn't a mean man. I want to be clear about that. He wasn't mean. See, he just believed that the only thing standing between his family and ruin was constant labor. See, and maybe he was right. Maybe it was for a while." Silas turned the cup in his hands. "See, but my mother died at 43, and my oldest brother, the one who worked hardest, he couldn't even sit on a porch without getting anxious. See, couldn't just be, not for a minute, because being still meant you were failing." See, Elowen was very quiet. "I'm not building that here," Silas said. "See, I decided that a long time ago, and I'm not telling you what happened to you before. See, I don't know all of it, but I can see some of it, and I'm telling you that here, you can stop. See, when the work is done, it's done. Your worth doesn't go down when you sit still." See, Elowen looked at the table. She wanted to say something. See, she turned over several possible responses, and none of them were exactly right. And finally what came out was, "That's hard to believe." "See, I know." He said, "I figured it would be. Not because I think you're lying," she added quickly. "See, I know that too." She wrapped both hands tighter around the cup. "See, I've been the extra mouth my whole life. See, the one that had to justify the space it took up. And if you keep working, if you keep doing enough at least, then there's an argument. See, at least then you can say, look, I'm worth the meal. See, I'm worth the roof." She stopped. She hadn't meant to say that much. See, Silas didn't fill the silence right away. He let it sit there, which was something she had come to notice about him. He didn't rush in to fix things. See, he let things breathe. "You don't owe me that argument," he said finally. "See, everybody says things like that," Elowen said, and immediately regretted it, because it sounded like she was accusing him. See, but he didn't look offended. He looked like someone who had expected that. "See, then I guess I'll have to show you instead of say it," he said. See, he pushed his chair back and took his cup to the porch. See, she heard him out there for a while just sitting, by the sound of it. See, just sitting on his own porch, not doing anything. See, she sat in the kitchen with her coffee and thought about a man who had chosen peace, and what it had cost him to choose it, and whether she was capable of learning the same thing. See, she didn't know, but she thought maybe she was willing to try. See, the gossip started in the 3rd week. She heard it first from the dry goods store in town, where she'd gone with Silas to pick up supplies. See, a woman named Helen Pratt married to the man who ran the livery. See, known for having opinions about everyone and sharing them freely, had looked at Elowen with an expression that was almost sympathetic and entirely patronizing, and said, "You're the Mercer girl, aren't you?" See, the one Martha placed with Silas Rourke. Elowen had been reaching for a bolt of thread. See, she put it in the basket. "Yes, ma'am." Well, Helen had lowered her voice in the way people do when they want to seem discreet but actually want to be heard. "See, you must be a strong girl, ending up in a situation like that." See, Elowen had looked at her directly. "What situation would that be, ma'am?" See, Helen had glanced toward the front of the store where Silas was talking to the shopkeeper. See, well, a young girl, a man on his own. You know how people talk. "See, I don't actually," Elowen said. "Why don't you tell me?" See, Helen had made a sound in her throat and moved to another aisle. See, on the ride back, Elowen stared at the road and said nothing. See, Silas drove without talking, but he'd been at the front of the store, not far enough away, and she wondered what he'd heard. See, she wondered what he'd been hearing from people she hadn't been in the room for. See, Helen Pratt thinks I'm your... She stopped. Tried again. See, she thinks this arrangement is inappropriate. Helen Pratt thinks everything she doesn't understand is inappropriate, Silas said. See, that's a long list. She's not the only one who thinks it. See, Silas was quiet for a moment. No, he said, she's not. See, doesn't that bother you? He considered that. It bothers me that it bothers you, he said. See, that's different from it bothering me for myself. See, Elowen pulled at her sleeve. People are saying my mother sold me to a lonely widower. See, Silas's jaw tightened. Just a little, just for a second. See, yes, I've heard versions of that and... See, and I think the people saying it have never been hungry enough to understand what makes a person desperate, and have never been lonely enough to understand what a man does and does not do with that loneliness. He paused. See, but I also think that what they say matters to you, and I'm not going to pretend it doesn't. See, Elowen turned to look at him. What am I to you? The words came out before she could arrange them. See, she'd been sitting on them for 3 weeks, turning them over, examining them from every angle, trying to figure out if she actually wanted the answer. See, the question hung in the cold air between them. Silas kept his eyes on the road for a moment. See, then he looked at her. Someone who belongs, he said. See, she waited for more. For the qualifier. For the but, the as long as, the provided that. See, none of it came. He looked back at the road and drove, and the answer just sat there, plain and complete, and Elowen didn't know what to do with something that simple. See, she looked at her hands in her lap. She pulled at the sleeve again. See, someone who belongs. She had never belonged anywhere. See, not the farm that resented her presence, not the body that carried a scar she kept hidden. See, not the settlement that whispered about her like she was a problem that needed solving. See, she turned the words over and over and didn't say anything else for the rest of the drive. See, and when they got back to the ranch, she helped unload the supplies and made supper, and went to bed and lay awake a long time staring at the ceiling of her small, quiet room. See, someone who belongs. She didn't let herself believe it yet. See, but she kept the words. The weeks that followed brought a rhythm she hadn't expected to want. See, mornings on the ranch had a shape to them. Silas up early, but not frantic, coffee made, work begun at the pace of a man who knew how long things took and didn't fight the timeline. See, Elowen found herself moving inside that rhythm like water finding a channel. See, she still worked hard. She couldn't help that. It was baked in too deep, but she noticed she was beginning to pause sometimes. See, actually pause. Stand at the kitchen window with her cup and watch the light change on the grass and not feel guilty about it. See, that was new. She was also beginning to notice things about Silas that she cataloged without meaning to. See, he never raised his voice. Not at the animals. Not when things went wrong, and things went wrong on a ranch, with a regularity that would have made her mother shout. Not at the weather. Not at the fence posts. Not at his own miscalculations. See, when the water trough cracked and flooded the near paddock in early November, he stood there looking at it for a long moment, and then said, very quietly, well, see, there goes the morning, and fixed it, without drama. See, without finding someone to blame. He also noticed things. See, small things. He noticed she didn't eat the skin of the salt pork and never put it on her plate. See, he noticed she favored her right side when carrying heavy things, not because anything was wrong, just habit. See, he noticed that she'd started reading one of his books from the shelf by the fire in the evenings, and hadn't said anything about it, just picked it up and started reading, like she was checking first to see if she'd be stopped. See, he hadn't stopped her. He'd just gone to the other chair and read his own book, and that had been that. See, one evening in mid-November, the temperature dropped suddenly and hard, the way it did on that part of the frontier, no warning, just a wall of cold rolling in from the north. See, Elowen had gone out to check the chickens, and the latch on the coop had given her trouble, her fingers already stiffening in the cold, and by the time she got back inside, she was shaking in a way she couldn't control. See, Silas was at the fire. He saw her come in and was up before she made it 3 steps into the room. See, sit down, he said, not a question. She sat. He went to the kitchen and came back with a blanket, a heavy wool one, from the chest in the hallway, and put it around her shoulders without asking. See, he didn't put it around her gently, the way people do when they're performing gentleness. See, he just put it around her quickly, practically, the way you cover something that's cold. See, she held the edges of it together. The latch needs replacing, she said, because she felt she needed to report something useful. See, I know. I've been putting it off. I can fix it tomorrow. See, I'll do it. He crouched down in front of the fire and added a log. See, you've got smaller hands. The good jobs are the ones with room to swing a hammer. See, she almost smiled. That's a very polite way of saying, you don't want me replacing your latch. See, that's a very accurate way of reading what I said. He sat back in his chair. See, how bad are your fingers? They're fine. He looked at her. See, they're fine, she said again, slightly more convincingly. See, he got up and went to the kitchen and came back with a bowl of warm water and set it on the floor in front of her chair. See, put your hands in that. This is unnecessary, Elowen. See, she put her hands in the bowl. He went back to his chair and his book. See, she sat with her hands in the warm water and the blanket around her shoulders and the fire going in front of her, and the feeling that welled up was so large and strange that she couldn't name it right away. See, she named it eventually. Being cared for. She had been cared for. See, by an ordinary man in a very ordinary way, with a bowl of water and a wool blanket. See, and it felt like something so foreign that she had to sit very still to hold it without startling. See, she did not cry. She pressed her lips together and looked at the fire and breathed slowly. See, and when Silas glanced up from his book a few minutes later, she was looking at him. See, she didn't look away fast enough. He just looked back at her. See, easy, steady, like a man who wasn't bothered by being looked at. See better? He asked. Better, she said. The gossip had not stopped. See, if anything, it had gotten worse as the weeks passed, and Elowen showed no sign of leaving the Rourke ranch. See, some of the women in the settlement had apparently moved from simple whisper campaigns to something more organized, because one afternoon a woman Elowen didn't know well a Mrs. See, Caldwell, broad-shouldered, the kind of woman who probably meant well and expressed it badly, had appeared at the ranch on some errand that seemed conveniently manufactured. See, Elowen answered the door. Mrs. Caldwell had looked at her for a moment with the scrutiny of a woman taking inventory, and then said, with terrible cheerfulness, "And how are you settling in, dear? We've all been so concerned." See, Elowen had held the door open at exactly the width that said she was not inviting anyone in. See, that's kind, ma'am. I'm settling fine. It must be lonely. See, out here, just the two of you, we stay fairly busy. See, I imagine. Mrs. Caldwell had leaned forward, dropping her voice. See, you know, dear, if you ever find yourself in a situation where you need someone to go to my door is always open. See, you don't have to stay somewhere you don't feel safe. See, Elowen had looked at her for a long moment. She thought about saying something sharp. See, she was capable of sharp. She had a whole cabinet of sharp she'd never been allowed to use. See, but she thought about Silas and his bowl of warm water and his wool blanket and his complete, unadorned steadiness, and she said very politely, "I appreciate your concern. See, I feel safe here. Goodbye, Mrs. Caldwell." She closed the door. See, she stood in the hallway for a second, breathing. Then she went back to the kitchen and finished what she'd been doing, which was making a pot of bean soup for supper, and she cut the onion more aggressively than was strictly necessary. See, Silas came in that evening and ate the soup without comment, which was the right thing to do with bean soup made in emotional circumstances. See, after supper he said, "Someone came by today, Mrs. See, Caldwell. I saw the wagon from the far field. What did she want?" See, Elowen set down her dish rag to make sure I wasn't in a situation. See, Silas was quiet. "I'm tired of being a situation," Elowen said. See, the words came out with more heat than she'd intended. See, I'm tired of people looking at me like I'm something that happened to somebody instead of just a person. See, I lived on a farm. My mother took me to town. A man was decent enough to not negotiate over me like livestock. See, that's it. That's the whole story. But everybody needs it to be something else. See, Silas had his hands flat on the table. He was watching her with that careful attention she'd gotten used to. See, let them need it, he said. Easy to say, I know it is. He paused. See, Elowen. People in small places need stories, especially about things they don't understand. See, and they don't understand this. He gestured between them, at the kitchen, at the ranch, at the whole arrangement, because it doesn't fit any box they've got. See, so they'll make it fit a box they understand. The only way to stop that is to live your life so plainly and so clearly that eventually even they can't argue with what they're looking at. See, she stood with her hands on the counter. And how long does that take? See, longer than it should, he said, and shorter than you think. See, she didn't feel better exactly, but she felt less alone with it. See, which wasn't the same thing, but it was something. See, December came, and the cold settled in to stay. The ranch hunkered down under the weight of it, the way all things did out here, not fighting it, just adjusting to it, doing what the season required. See, Elowen had expected the isolation to bother her more than it did. See, 11 miles from town in December might as well have been 100. See, but she found she didn't miss the town the way she'd thought she might. See, what she missed was harder to name. She missed something she'd never had, which was probably the cruelest kind of missing. See, she missed, she thought, turning it over carefully, a sense of being known. See, of someone carrying a picture of you in their mind that was accurate. See, her mother had carried a picture of her that was only a list of duties. See, the town carried a picture of her that was a cautionary tale. See, she was beginning to wonder if Silas carried any picture of her at all, or if she was still just a presence he'd decided to accommodate. See, then one evening she came downstairs to find him at the table with a book open in front of him that wasn't his book. See, it was hers, the one she'd been reading from his shelf. See, she stopped at the bottom of the stairs. He looked up. See, something moved across his face, not guilt, not quite. See, maybe the look of a man who'd been caught doing something he hadn't fully decided was appropriate. See, you dog-eared page 72, he said. I couldn't find a scrap of paper. See, I've got a whole drawer of scrap paper. I didn't know that. See, he closed the book and pushed it across the table toward her. See, she doesn't deserve him, he said. The woman in the book. See, she takes everything he does for granted. Elowen came to the table and picked up the book. See, I thought you hadn't read it. I read everything on that shelf. See, some of them twice. He leaned back in his chair. What do you think of it? See, she sat down across from him. She thought about it honestly, which was a new thing, being asked her opinion about something and actually having room to form one. See, I think she deserves more credit than he gives her, Elowen said. See, she's not just careless, she's scared. She's been taught that caring about things directly is how you get hurt. See, so she pretends not to care. That's not the same as not caring. See, Silas looked at her. Elowen looked at the book cover. See, that's a good reading, he said. It's just what I thought. See, I know, he said. That's why it's good. She went to bed that night with something that felt cautiously, carefully like connection, a thread, not a rope, but still. See, a thread between two people who had both, in their different ways, been left with the habit of solitude and were now slowly in the way of two creatures approaching a watering hole from opposite sides, figuring out how to share the water. See, the question, the real question, the one that had been growing in the back of her mind since the wagon ride in October, had shifted during that conversation without her noticing. See, it was no longer what am I to him, it had become something harder. See, something more frightening in its specificity. What did she want him to be to her? See, she didn't let herself answer it, not that night. She pulled the quilt up and listened to the wind outside and told herself she had time. See, she told herself there was no urgency. She was almost right. See, the urgency arrived the way most things did on the frontier, unannounced, in the form of another person's opinion. See, this time it was not Mrs. Caldwell, and it was not Helen Pratt, and it was not any of the quiet, sideways judgment she'd been absorbing since October. See, it was a letter. It came with the supply rider in the second week of December, addressed to Silas in a handwriting she didn't recognize. See, she brought it inside and left it on the table, which was where they left things for each other. See, that evening, Silas read it at the table with his coffee and didn't say anything. See, Elowen ate her supper and didn't ask, but she saw his jaw. See, she saw the way his jaw went tight, the way it had in the wagon when she'd mentioned the gossip. See, what is it? She asked. He folded the letter. It's from someone on the settlement council, he said. See, there are a few people who've formally raised a concern about your situation here. See, my situation. They want to know if the arrangement is sanctioned. See, whether there's a formal understanding of your position. He paused. See, what they actually want to know is whether anyone is accountable for you. See, whether you're protected. Elowen put down her fork. See, and if no one is, what happens? Silas looked at the letter on the table. See, they'll pressure your mother to come and collect you. See, or they'll suggest you be placed somewhere with a family. See, the word collect landed like a stone. She thought of her mother. See, she thought of the wagon ride in October, the sack of flour on the counter, the way Martha had looked at the flour, instead of at her when Elowen walked out the door. See, she thought about going back to that homestead, the cold mornings, the measured portions, the ledger that never balanced in her favor. See, no, she said. The word came out very quiet and very certain. See, Silas looked at her. I'm not going back, she said. See, I'm not going to be collected like something left behind in the mud. She met his eyes. See, I know you didn't ask for any of this. I know this is more complicated than you wanted it to be when you walked into that trading post. See, but I am not going back. He was very still. I didn't bring it up to scare you, he said. See, I know. I brought it up because he stopped. Started again. See, because I've been thinking about it since before the letter arrived. See, and I want to handle it right. I want to give you something that can't be taken by a settlement council, or your mother, or Helen Pratt, or anyone else with opinions. He turned the letter over in his hands. See, but I also don't want to make a decision for you. See, I've watched enough of that happen to you already. See, Elowen waited. Silas looked at her steadily. I want to marry you, he said. See, if you're willing, not because of the letter, not because of the gossip. See, because he stopped again, and for the first time she saw something in his face that was not steady. See, that was not certain, something that looked a great deal like a man standing at the edge of something and not knowing whether the other side would hold him. See, because the house has been different since you got here, he said. See, and I don't want it to go back to what it was. The words settled into the room. See, Elowen sat with them for a long moment. She pressed her hands flat on the table. See, I don't know if I know how to love someone the right way, she said. See, I don't know if I was built for it, the way I was raised. See, she shook her head. I'm not saying no. I'm saying I'm afraid of promising something I can't deliver. See, I'm not asking for a promise of perfect love, Silas said. See, I wouldn't know what to do with that. I'm asking if you're willing to stay. See, and to try. That's the whole ask. Elowen looked at the table. See, at his hands, flat and still on the other side of it. See, at the letter folded between them. I need to think about it, she said. See, I know. Don't, she looked up. Don't change while I'm thinking. See, don't be different. I need to see, I'll be exactly the same, he said. See, I promise you that. She nodded. She went to bed, and she did not sleep for a long time, and outside the wind had picked up again, and the cold was pressing against the windows of her small, quiet room. See, and she lay in the dark and felt with a clarity that surprised her that for once in her life the question she was carrying was not what will happen to me, but what do I choose? See, that was new. That was the newest thing she had ever felt. See, she thought about it for 3 days. Not 3 days of agonizing, not 3 days of dramatic pacing and tearful deliberation, just 3 days of watching. See, she'd told him she needed to see him be the same, and she meant it, and so she watched with the focused, quiet attention of someone who had learned early that the difference between what people said and what people did was where the truth actually lived. See, on the first day, Silas fixed the chicken coop latch he'd been putting off, the way he always put off small repairs until something forced the issue. See, He came in for lunch and ate the food she'd made and said it was good, which it was, and went back out without any particular weight in the room. See, he was the same. On the second day, he got a splinter the size of a small nail from a fence post and spent 20 minutes in the kitchen trying to get it out himself before admitting defeat and asking if she had steadier hands, which she did. See, she sat across from him at the kitchen table and worked the splinter out with a needle, and he held still and didn't make a sound, which she filed as information about the kind of man he was. See, afterward he said thank you and went back to work. See, he was the same. See, on the third day, he came in from the far field with mud up to his knee from a drainage ditch that had frozen badly overnight and thawed too fast, and he stood in the back doorway looking at himself and said, with considerable feeling, "Well, see, that's a fine thing." See, he took off the boots, left them outside, and walked through the kitchen in his socks, which were also considerably muddy, and went upstairs to change, and then came back down and made coffee and didn't complain about any of it to anyone. See, he was exactly the same. Elowen went out to the barn that afternoon. See, she'd thought about doing it differently, sitting him down at the table the way he'd sat her down, making it formal, making it a moment. See, but she was not built for constructed moments. She was built for barn light and cold air and the sound of horses and the feeling of standing in a place where nobody was watching you perform anything. See, Silas was repairing a piece of harness, sitting on an overturned crate with the leather across his knee and an awl in his hand. See, he looked up when she came in. He didn't put down the awl. See, he just looked up, the way he looked at things, without rushing toward them. See, she stood in the middle of the barn and said, "I can't promise you perfect love." See, he waited. "I don't know what I'm capable of. I know what I was taught, and most of what I was taught is wrong, and I'm still unlearning it. See, I'm going to be bad at this in ways I can't predict yet." She pressed her hands together. See, but your house is the first place I've ever felt like I could breathe at a normal pace. See, and I don't think that's a small thing. I think that might actually be everything, or at least the beginning of everything. See, Silas set the harness on the crate beside him. "Is that a yes?" he asked. See, "That's a yes," she said. He nodded. He nodded the way he did everything without excess, without performance. See, then he picked the harness back up and kept working. See, and she stood in the barn for a moment, feeling the particular strangeness of having made the biggest decision of her life in a place that smelled like horse and hay, and then she went back inside to start supper. See, that was how they got engaged. No one would have written poems about it. See, that suited Elowen fine. She'd had her fill of things that looked beautiful from the outside. See, the settlement council was notified. The letter Silas sent was brief. She'd watched him write it, the short, precise sentences of a man who had no patience for rhetorical excess, and the response came back within the week. See, which was fast by frontier standards, and suggested that the council had been waiting with considerable anticipation. See, the response was formal and stiff, and basically amounted to, "Very well, that resolves the matter." See, Elowen read it over Silas's shoulder and felt something she identified after a moment as contempt. See, the whole bureaucratic performance of concern, all of it, had been about paperwork. See, about who was accountable on paper, not about her. See, never actually about her. "Don't," Silas said without looking at her. See, "Don't what?" "Whatever you're deciding to feel about that letter. See, save it." He folded it and set it in the basket where old letters went. See, "You'll find better uses for the energy. I'm allowed to be angry." See, "I didn't say you weren't." He pushed the basket to the back of the table. See, "I said save it, not spend it here." She thought about arguing. See, she decided he was right, which was annoying. The gossip, predictably, did not stop when the engagement became known. See, if anything, it transformed. Where before people had whispered that the Mercer girl was in a compromise situation, they now whispered that Silas Rourke had done the desperate and slightly absurd thing of marrying a girl who'd been, see, in the words of Helen Pratt, practically handed to him off a wagon. See, the moral geography of the rumors shifted. Elowen moved, in the settlement's imagination, from victim to opportunist. See, She had, the story now went, played a lonely widower quite cleverly. See, gotten herself a house and a ring by being young and available at the right moment. See, Elowen heard this version secondhand from a girl named Bessie Dunn, who worked at the dry goods store and who told her with the misplaced enthusiasm of someone who thinks they're being helpful. See, I just thought you should know what people are saying, Bessie said. See, Elowen said. It's not what I think, Bessie added quickly. See, what do you think? Bessie blinked. I think you seem like a capable person. See, that's something. Elowen paid for her purchases. See, tell me something, Bessie. Do people talk about what Silas is getting out of this arrangement? See, Bessie frowned. Well, I suppose some people say he's getting someone to manage the house and... See, and nobody thinks it's strange that they're talking about what I'm getting and what he's using, but nobody's asking whether two people might just she stopped herself because she was getting heat in her face and she didn't want it, never mind. See, thank you for telling me. She walked out of the store and stood on the planks and breathed the cold air and reminded herself of what Silas had said. See, save it. Find better uses for the energy. She was trying. See, it was not easy. She'd spent her whole life being the thing that got decided about. And apparently the only difference was that people were deciding different things about her, and it was supposed to feel like progress. See, she was still working out how it felt. What helped, strangely, was a conversation she hadn't expected to have. See, it happened at the end of December, 11 days before the new year, when a woman she'd only spoken to twice came by the ranch. See, her name was Ruth Arden. She was 50 or so, a widow who ran a small farm 6 miles north of the Rourke place, and she'd come ostensibly to return a tool she'd borrowed from Silas sometime last spring. See, which was such an obvious pretext that Elowen almost smiled when she opened the door. See, is Silas in? Ruth asked. He's out checking the east fence. See, he'll be back before dark. Elowen stepped back from the door. See, you can wait inside if you want. Ruth came in. She sat at the kitchen table and accepted the coffee Elowen offered, and for a few minutes they talked about nothing: the cold, the fence line, the state of the east pasture grass. See, then Ruth set her cup down. I want to say something to you, she said. See, and I want you to let me finish before you decide how to take it. See, Elowen sat down across from her. All right, I was widowed at 29, Ruth said. See, my husband was a good man and he died of a fever in February, and I had a farm and no one who knew how to run it with me. See, I had 3 different men from this settlement come to my door in the first year to offer assistance of various kinds. See, 2 of them were decent. 1 of them wasn't. I made the mistake of listening to people who told me who was who. She paused. See, I've known Silas Rourke for 11 years. I knew his wife. See, she was a good woman, and when she died, he grieved her properly, and then he did the thing that good people do. He kept going. See, he runs an honest ranch, he pays fair, he doesn't drink mean or talk ugly about people. She looked at Elowen directly. See, he's not a complicated man to understand, but he's also not a simple man to deserve. See, he asks for very little, and he gives a great deal, and he does it without keeping score, which is rarer than you'd think. See, Elowen held her cup. I'm not telling you what to do, Ruth said. See, I'm telling you that what people out there are saying that you maneuvered yourself here, that you played him. Whatever the story is this week, it's not just unfair to you. See, it's unfair to him, because it assumes a man like Silas can be maneuvered. See, that he can be gotten around. She snorted softly. See, if you could have gotten around Silas Rourke, you'd have seen through him by now. See, and you're still here, so. Elowen sat with that for a moment. See, he's not perfect, she said. Lord, no, Ruth said immediately. See, he holds things in too long. He doesn't ask for help when he should. See, he'll work through an injury rather than admit it, because he's got that particular male stubbornness about suffering quietly. She sipped her coffee. See, but he won't lie to you, and he won't make you small. See, and those 2 things in my experience cover a remarkable amount of ground. See, Silas came in from the east fence about an hour later to find Elowen and Ruth at his kitchen table talking about books. Of all things, Ruth had apparently read extensively, something Elowen wouldn't have guessed. See, and they had found common ground in a particular author they both liked and both had strong opinions about. See, he stood in the doorway and looked at the two of them with the expression of a man who is surprised but not displeased, and then he went and washed his hands and poured himself a cup of coffee and sat down and mostly listened. See, on her way out, Ruth shook Elowen's hand. "You're all right," she said. See, it was blunt and warm, and exactly the right amount of both. See, "Thank you," Elowen said, "for all of it." Ruth waved it away. See, she said goodbye to Silas, retrieved her tool from the barn, and drove her wagon north in the pale December light. See, Silas stood at the door watching her go. "She came to check on you," he said. "See, I know. Did it help?" Elowen considered. "Yes," she said. "See, more than I expected." He nodded and went inside, and she stood on the porch a moment longer, and the world looked a little less like a place that had already decided what she was. See, the wedding happened on a Thursday in early January. See, which was not a romantic choice, but a practical one. It was the day the traveling justice of the peace passed through Hadley Crossing on his monthly circuit, and Silas had written ahead to arrange it. See, they went into town in the wagon, the two of them, and stood in the front room of the dry goods store, which was the largest indoor space available, and the justice read the words, and they said the words, and it was over in about 15 minutes. See, some people were there. Not the whole settlement, it wasn't that kind of wedding, but enough. See, Ruth Arden stood near the back, with her arms folded and her chin up, looking like someone prepared to physically defend the proceeding if necessary. See, Grover from the trading post was there, which surprised Elowen, but he shook her hand afterward with real warmth and said, gruffly, that he hoped she'd be happy, and she believed him. See, even Bessie Dunn from the dry goods store, who had apparently decided that being present was better than hearing about it secondhand, hovered near a display of sugar sacks and watched with wide eyes. See, Helen Pratt was not there. Mrs. Caldwell was not there. See, other absences registered only after, people Elowen had vaguely hoped might surprise her by showing up and being decent. See, they didn't. She'd long ago stopped expecting the world to suddenly decide to be better. See, there was one absence that registered differently. See, Martha Mercer was not there. Elowen had not sent a formal invitation. See, she'd turned that over for a week, had written a letter in her head a dozen times, each version a different kind of request, some of them dignified and some of them not, and in the end, she hadn't sent anything. See, she hadn't been able to figure out what she wanted the letter to say. See, please come felt like crawling, you're not invited felt like cruelty. See, she'd settled on nothing, which was its own kind of answer. See, standing at the front of the dry goods store, saying words that were real and serious and would alter the entire shape of her life, Elowen glanced at the door. See, just once. Martha wasn't there. See, she turned back to face Silas, and she looked at him, the gray at his temples, the jaw that still needed a razor, the pale eyes that could have been gray or green depending on the light, and she said the words the justice was waiting for. See, and she meant them as much as she was capable of meaning anything, which she thought was probably enough to start with. See, Silas put a plain band on her finger. She put a plain band on his. See, he didn't have a great speech. He looked at her and said quietly, "I meant what I said in the barn," which was not romantic, strictly speaking, but Elowen found she preferred it to romantic. See, romantic could be manufactured. I meant what I said in the barn could not. See, the justice shook their hands, collected his fee, and moved on to his next stop. See, the ride back to the ranch was cold and clear. See, Elowen sat next to Silas on the wagon bench and watched the winter pale grass go by and thought about how it was possible that the most significant thing that had ever happened to her had felt, from the outside, like very little. See, "You're quiet," Silas said. "I'm thinking about." See, she was quiet another moment. "My mother," she said. See, he didn't say anything hasty, which she appreciated. See, "I'm not sad about her not being there," Elowen said carefully. See, "Not exactly. I think I'm sad about the version of her that should have been there." See, "That isn't the same thing." "No," Silas said, "it isn't." See, I spent a long time thinking that if I worked hard enough, if I was useful enough, she'd start to see me as something other than a cost. Elowen looked at the road. See, I know that's not how people work. See, she wasn't going to change because I hauled enough water. See, no, he said again. She stopped. I wanted the version of her that would have clapped me on the shoulder and said, "Good, you did good." See, even once. She looked down at the ring on her hand. See, I never got that, and I don't think I'm going to get it. See, Silas drove for a while. Then he said, "I know something about that." See, she waited. My father he didn't know how to see us as anything except an extension of the farm. See, we were good workers, or we were poor ones. I was good enough that he had no complaints, which isn't the same as being seen. He adjusted the reins. See, he died when I was 28, and I stood at his grave and thought, there is nothing here to forgive, because he didn't wrong me the way a bad man wrongs people. See, he just never quite saw me. He paused, and I grieved the version of him that should have existed. See, not the one that did. Elowen turned to look at him. See, he kept his eyes on the road. "So I understand it," he said. See, that specific kind of grief, for something you never had. See, she looked back at the road, too. They drove the rest of the way in a silence that was not empty. See, it was the particular silence of two people who have recognized something in each other that they hadn't expected the other person to have, and are sitting with that recognition quietly, because some things don't need more words on top of them. See, the ranch looked different when they came back to it, and she wasn't sure if that was the ranch or her. See, probably her. She went inside and made supper. She made something better than usual, not out of duty, but because it was the day it was, and she felt like it, and Silas set the table properly, which he didn't always do. See, and they ate together, and it was ordinary and warm, and not perfect. And she thought, sitting there with the lamp going, and the cold pressing against the windows, this is what I chose. See, not rescue, not salvation, not the end of difficulty. See, just this, a table, a lamp, a man who understood a specific kind of grief she'd thought was only hers. See, this, she thought, is where I start. That was January. See, by February, she had started to understand the ranch in the way you understand a place when you've committed to it, not as a guest, not as someone who might leave. See, but as someone who is going to be there when the fence needs fixing, and when the spring floods come, and when the summer is so dry, you start counting every cloud. See, she started learning the land's habits the way she'd always learned things, by watching and then doing, and then adjusting when the watching had missed something. See, Silas taught her things when she asked, and didn't teach her things when she was figuring them out herself, which was the best way to be taught. See, he had the patience of a man who had no interest in making other people feel small for not knowing things, because he had once not known things, and somebody had made him feel small about it, and he'd carried that feeling for a long time. See, she asked him about it once. See, they were out in the near field in early February, checking a stretch of fence that the winter had weakened, and she'd made a mistake reading the tension on a wire and pulled it wrong, and it had snapped back and caught her hand, not badly. See, but enough to sting, and she'd said something uncharitable under her breath, and he'd shown her the correct way to read the tension without once suggesting that the incorrect way was obvious. See, you're patient, she said after, with most things. See, were you always? He thought about it. No, I was impatient when I was young. See, I thought patience was what you did when you'd given up on things moving faster. He tested the fence wire. See, I was wrong about that. Patience is what you do when you understand that things have their own timeline, and fighting it doesn't help. See, what changed you? He pulled the wire taut and fixed it to the post. See, my wife, he said. He said it simply, the way he said most things, not with weight, but not without it either. See, she was the most patient person I've ever known, and she never made a performance of it. See, she was just... He paused. She could wait. She could sit in a hard situation and not need it to resolve itself faster than it was going to. See, I learned a lot from watching that. Elowen had never heard him talk about his wife before. See, she hadn't asked. It seemed like a door you waited to be opened. See, what was she like, she said. He stood up and looked at the fence line. See, practical, he said. She had no patience for pretension. See, she liked bad weather because it cleared the air. She couldn't cook bread to save her life, but she made the best pie I've ever had. He smiled, very slightly. See, she wasn't the kind of woman who needed life to be pretty. See, she needed it to be honest. She sounds like someone worth knowing, Elowen said. See, she was, he said. And then he picked up the tools and walked to the next section of fence, and she followed him, and they worked the rest of the afternoon in comfortable silence. See, she didn't feel threatened by the wife, which surprised her a little. See, she'd expected to. She'd expected that kind of female unease, that particular jealousy of the dead. See, but she didn't feel it. Maybe because Silas spoke about his wife the way you speak about a whole person, not a ghost, not a saint, not an absence that defined everything. See, just a person he'd known and loved and lost, who had shaped him in ways he didn't hide from. See, that was the kind of man who could be trusted with a person's history, she thought. See, someone who didn't make the past shameful or perfect, but just part of the record. See, she was thinking about that when the trouble came. See, and it came, as trouble had a way of doing, from a direction she hadn't been watching. See, it started with a man named Carter Briggs, who ran a small cattle operation 12 miles east of Hadley Crossing, and who had, apparently, some long-standing business disagreement with Silas that Elowen hadn't known about. See, the nature of the disagreement involved a water source, a creek, that ran along a boundary between the two properties, the rights to which were apparently contested in a way that had been smoldering for years, and had now, see, in the dry late winter weeks of February, decided to catch fire. See, Briggs rode to the ranch on a Tuesday afternoon when Silas was out at the east field and found Elowen alone in the yard, splitting wood. See, she looked up when the horse came through the gate. See, the man on it was broad, red-faced from cold or from a general disposition toward heat, and he had the look of someone who had rehearsed what he was about to say and was slightly annoyed to be delivering it to the wrong audience. See, I'm looking for Rourke, he said. He's not here. See, I'm his wife. She set the axe down and stood with her hands at her sides. See, I can take a message. Briggs looked at her with an expression that was only barely respectful. See, you're the girl he married. I'm the woman he married. She met his eyes. See, and I asked if you had a message. He assessed her for a moment. See, whatever he saw must have been enough, because he got off the horse. See, you can tell him, Briggs said, that I've filed with the county on the creek rights. See, it's going to court, and I've got documentation that goes back further than anything he's holding, and he should plan accordingly. See, Elowen looked at him. What documentation? Briggs blinked. See, that's between me and your documentation that you filed with the county about a boundary water source that affects this ranch. She kept her voice level. See, I'm asking what you're claiming specifically, because if you're going to tell my husband to plan accordingly, I'd like to know what we're planning for. See, Briggs stared at her. The original survey, he said, more slowly, from 1867, has the creek centerline as the boundary. See, Rourke's been drawing from the west bank, which in a dry year pulls water that. See, the 1867 survey also has the northwest property corner 40 feet off from where Silas's deed has it, Elowen said. See, she'd read the deed. She'd read everything she could find about the property in the first weeks because understanding what you'd signed onto seemed basic. See, if you're using that survey, you've got a problem in the northwest that doesn't help your argument. See, Briggs stared at her for a longer moment. You've read the deed, he said. See, I've read the deed, she said. He was quiet for a moment. See, he looked slightly less certain than he had when he'd ridden in, which was satisfying. See, tell Rourke I was here, he said. I'll tell him, she said. See, he got back on his horse and rode out without the swagger he'd arrived with, and Elowen went back to splitting wood, and when Silas came home, she told him about the visit and what had been said and what she'd said in return. See, he sat at the kitchen table and looked at her for a long moment. See, you've read the deed, he said. I've read all of it. See, the deed, the survey records, the water agreements. See, you had them in the box in the study. He was still looking at her with that expression she couldn't quite name. See, what, she said. Nothing, he said. He stopped. See, you're surprised. I'm not surprised. He seemed to be looking for the right word. See, I'm glad, he said finally. I've been alone here a long time. See, I forgot what it was like to not be the only person paying attention. See, Elowen looked at the table. She felt something in her chest that was warm and slightly awkward, the way things felt when they were real. See, I've got some thoughts on the county filing too, she said, keeping her voice practical, because that was easier than sitting in the warm, awkward feeling. See, if you want to hear them. I want to hear them, he said. See, she sat down and told him what she thought. He listened with the full attention she'd learned to expect from him, not passive, not merely polite, but genuinely tracking, asking questions, offering his own thoughts as they went. See, it was, she realized, the first time in her life that she'd sat with another person and been treated as though her analysis of something mattered. See, not her labor, not her usefulness, her thinking. She almost pointed that out and then decided against it, because it seemed like the kind of thing that was true whether she said it or not. See, they talked through the water rights issue for an hour. See, by the end, they had a plan, not a perfect plan, because the situation was genuinely complicated, but a reasonable one, and it was as much hers as his, and both of them knew it. See, she washed up after and looked out the kitchen window at the dark field and thought about the February sky and the fence and Ruth Arden's words and the man at the kitchen table who kept surprising her by treating her as. See, though the inside of her head was worth consulting. See, she'd been afraid, in the barn when she'd said yes, that she was agreeing to something she'd only half understand until it was too late to adjust. See, she was beginning to see that this was wrong. She was beginning to see that she'd agreed to something that was still unfolding, not in the way of a trap unfolding, but in the way of a country unfolding when you ride into it. See, new terrain revealing itself the further in you go. See, not all of it easy terrain, not all of it what she'd expected. See, but more of it hers than anything had ever been before. See, it was late February when the letter arrived from Martha. See, Elowen came in from feeding the chickens. Silas was in town at the county office about the water rights and found the envelope on the front step, which meant it had been hand-delivered. See, which meant someone had ridden it out from Hadley Crossing that morning. See, the handwriting on the front was her mother's. She'd have known it anywhere, the letters too upright, pressing too hard, as though Martha Mercer was determined to leave a mark, even on paper. See, Elowen stood in the yard and held it and didn't open it for a long time. See, she was not afraid of what it said. She'd been afraid of her mother's words her whole life, but that was a young girl's fear, built in a house where her mother's opinion determined whether she ate. See, she was not that girl anymore. She was someone else now. See, someone who had read a deed and made a plan and split her own wood and said yes in a barn when she meant it. See, she opened the letter. It was not long, 3 paragraphs, and Martha had never been a woman who used more words than she thought she needed. See, the gist of it was this. She had heard about the wedding from someone in town. See, she had expected to hear from Elowen. She had not. See, she did not comment on the marriage itself, except to say that she hoped Elowen had made a sensible choice. See, she said the winter had been hard. She said the east pasture fence had needed more work than she'd budgeted for. See, she said nothing about October, nothing about the trading post. See, nothing about the flower. See, at the very end, see, in the last line, see, she said, I think about you sometimes. See, Elowen read that line 3 times. See, she stood in the cold yard and read it 3 times, and she felt not forgiveness. Because there was nothing here to forgive, not yet, not in any clean way, she felt something more complicated and less resolved than forgiveness. See, she felt the weight of a woman who had been crushed by her own life until she'd stopped being able to see past it. See, she felt the old familiar pull of wanting that woman to be different, to be more, to have been capable of more. See, she folded the letter. She put it in her coat pocket. See, she went inside and made coffee and sat at the kitchen table with it and thought about to what to back and whether to write back, and what, if anything, she owed. See, she thought, I don't know yet, and she thought, that's allowed. See, she sat with the not knowing, which was something she'd gotten better at. Over the months, the practice of sitting with things that didn't resolve quickly, and she drank her coffee. See, and outside the February light came through the window at the angle it came through in winter, flat and pale, and making no promises about what came next. See, she was still sitting there when she heard Silas's wagon come through the gate. See, she got up and poured him a cup of coffee. He came in cold from the drive, stamped his boots on the mat, and saw her face. See, what happened, he said. She put the coffee in front of him. See, then she took the letter out of her pocket and set it on the table. See, he read it without touching it. She hadn't unfolded it. She realized he must have read just the outside and then looked back at her. See, do you want to talk about it? I don't know what there is to say yet, she said honestly. See, all right, he said. He picked up his coffee. She sat back down across from him. See, they sat in the kitchen together while the February light moved across the table, and neither of them spoke for a while, and the not speaking was not uncomfortable. See, and the letter sat on the table between them like a question that was going to take longer to answer than either of them would like. See, that was all right. Some questions were like that. See, she wrote back to Martha in March. It took her 6 weeks from the day the letter arrived to thee, the day she actually put words on paper, which told her something about how complicated the thing was. See, simple things didn't take 6 weeks. Simple things you answered in a day, or you didn't answer at all. See, this was neither of those. It was the kind of thing that required you to know what you wanted from it before you could decide what to say, and knowing what she wanted from her mother was like trying to read a survey map in the dark. See, what she finally wrote was short, shorter than Martha's letter, which she hadn't thought was possible. See, she said that she was well. She said the ranch was good, the work was good, that she had settled in more than she'd expected. See, she said she was sorry winter had been hard. She did not say, I looked at the door during my wedding and you weren't there. See, she did not say, you put a sack of flour on a counter and called it a daughter. See, she did not say any of the things that lived in the part of her chest she was still learning to manage. See, what she said at the end was, I hope the east pasture fence holds. See, it was not a warm letter, but it was a letter. She sealed it and gave it to the post rider and felt, not relief exactly, more like the setting down of something she'd been carrying in her coat pocket for 6 weeks. See, not gone. Just set down for now. See, Silas, when she told him she'd sent it, see, just nodded and said good. See, he didn't ask what she'd written. See, he didn't offer an opinion on whether it was the right thing to do. See, he just nodded, the way you nod at something that belonged to another person and was theirs to carry. See, she was still figuring out how to tell him that she loved him for exactly that. See, March moved into April, and April brought mud and longer light and the kind of work that accumulated like interest. Everything the winter had deferred came due at once. See, fence posts that had heaved with the frost needed resetting. See, the drainage on the north side of the barn needed redigging. See, there were 2 horses that had come through the winter ragged and needed more attention than any one person could reasonably give them. See, Elowen worked alongside Silas without being asked. See, not out of the old compulsion, or not entirely. She was honest with herself about the fact that the compulsion was still there, running like a river under new ice, but because she wanted to. See, the ranch was hers too, in the way that things become yours when you've invested yourself in them past the point of easy exit. See, she knew this land now. She knew which fence sections were original and which were replaced. See, she knew that the bay mare spooked at sudden movement but was steady in storms, which was counterintuitive but true. See, she knew that the drainage on the north barn side needed to be cleared on a specific schedule or it silted up in a predictable way. See, she had learned a place. That was something she had never done before. See, the water rights situation with Carter Briggs came to a resolution in April that was neither a win nor a loss for either party. which Elowen had privately predicted, and Silas had resisted predicting, because he was optimistic in the specific way of a man who'd been disappointed before and kept being optimistic anyway. The county ruled that the 1,867 survey was insufficient for boundary determination and ordered a new survey be conducted, which would take time and money that neither ranch wanted to spend. Briggs and Silas were advised to reach a private water-sharing agreement in the interim. Silas came home from the county office in a mood that was not exactly dark, but had a heaviness to it. He sat at the kitchen table and told her the ruling, and she listened, and when he was done, he sat there turning his coffee cup in his hands. I'll write up an agreement proposal tonight, Elowen said. He looked up. Something fair, she said. Specific. Water usage by month based on seasonal flow, with measurement points at both the north and south access. If we put it in writing and make the terms honest, he's got less to complain about, and we've got something to stand on if he decides to be difficult later. Silas looked at her with the expression she'd seen a few times now, the one she'd named privately, as surprised but trying not to show it. She was beginning to understand that he hadn't expected her to be this. Not because he'd thought less of her, she knew that wasn't it, but because he'd been alone long enough that he'd forgotten what it was like to have someone in the room whose mind was also working on the problem. All right, he said, you don't sound convinced. I'm convinced. He paused and set down the cup. Briggs is going to look at anything with your name on it and think he can push back because you're. Because I'm what? He met her eyes. Because he's the kind of man who thinks young women don't write legal agreements. Then he'll be surprised, Elowen said. And surprised people make mistakes. She pulled a piece of paper from the drawer. What are the specific months where the creek runs lowest? He told her. She wrote. They worked on it together for 2 hours at the kitchen table, and the agreement they produced was thorough and specific, and she thought quite good. Silas read the final version twice and made 2 small changes and handed it back. This is better than anything I'd have written alone, he said. She took the paper back. I know. He made a sound that was almost a laugh. She looked up. You've stopped hedging, he said. Is that bad? No, he said. It's good. You used to soften everything you knew, like it might be wrong to know it. He leaned back in his chair. You've stopped doing that. She thought about it. He was right, and she hadn't noticed until he named it. She'd spent so many years being uncertain of her own observations, being the person, as some perception was corrected, whose opinions were unsolicited, that she'd learned to qualify everything she said. I might be wrong, but maybe this isn't right, but the endless hedging of someone who had been told, implicitly and constantly, that their read on things wasn't to be trusted. She'd stopped doing it. Somewhere between February and April, she'd stopped. Huh, she said. Yeah, he said. She wrote a fair copy of the agreement, and Silas wrote it out to Briggs the next morning. Briggs read it, asked 2 questions, made 1 request for a change that was minor and reasonable, and signed it. When Silas came home and told her, she was out by the chicken coop, and she said, "Good," and went back to what she was doing. And Silas stood there watching her for a moment, with an expression she couldn't see, and then went to the barn. The gossip had not died, but it had changed character again. This happened gradually, in the way of all shifts in small community opinion, not a single event, but an accumulation of small ones. People saw Elowen at the trading post, and she was not cringing, or grateful, or desperate for their approval. People saw her manage an order with Grover that was complicated, and she managed it correctly. People heard about the Briggs water agreement. These things always got out in small settlements, and the version that circulated credited Silas, but there were enough people who knew enough to add that the new Mrs. Rourke had apparently had something to do with the drafting. Ruth Arden helped. Ruth had a particular social influence that came not from being liked by everyone, but from being respected by almost everyone, the way you respect a woman who has survived hard things without becoming either bitter or soft. When Ruth Arden said in the dry goods store in April that Elowen Rourke was one of the most capable young women she'd come across in a long time, people listened. See, not because Ruth was kind, she wasn't, especially, but because Ruth was accurate. See, she didn't give compliments for comfort. When she said something was good, it was good. See, Helen Pratt did not retract anything she'd ever said. See, Elowen had not expected her to. Some people's opinions of you crystallized early, and you just had to accept that the crystal wasn't going to dissolve no matter what you did. See, she accepted it. She was 17 years old when she'd walked out of the trading post in October. See, she was 18 now, and she did not need Helen Pratt's good opinion to know who she was. See, that was the change. That was the real change that had been happening since January, since the barn, since the bowl of warm water in November. See, since the day in the wagon when she'd understood that she was being asked what she wanted, and the answer to that question was her own responsibility. See, she was learning who she was, not who she was to her mother, not who she was to the settlement, not who she was to a ledger who she was. See, it was slow work and it was often uncomfortable, the way growth is uncomfortable when you've been kept in a small space and the space is suddenly larger. See, May brought a warm week in the middle of the month that felt like summer arriving ahead of schedule. See, the creek was running strong and the grass was coming in green and thick along the south pasture. See, and Elowen found herself standing at the edge of it. One afternoon, she'd come out to check on a ewe that had been lambing late, just standing there, looking at the green field and the creek and the sky. See, with her hands at her sides and nothing requiring her immediate attention. See, she stood there for a long time. She was allowed to stand there. See, nobody was counting it against her. She still had to remind herself sometimes. See, she did not think she would always have to. See, the conversation she had been half expecting finally happened in late May, when Silas came in from a long day in the south pasture and found her at the table with a book and sat down across from her and said, "See, in the careful way of a man who has been building up to something, I want to ask you something." See, she looked up. "And I want you to actually answer it," he said. See, not the answer that seems appropriate. She closed the book. See, "All right, are you happy?" The question landed, and she sat with it for a moment, turning it over. See, not performing the consideration, actually doing it. See, "I think so," she said. "I think I'm still learning what happy feels like as a normal state rather than an exception. See, I've had happy moments my whole life," she paused. See, they were always either in spite of something or waiting for the other shoe. See, I'm not used to it being the baseline. Silas nodded slowly. See, "But yes," she said. When I actually check, yes. See, I think this is what happy looks like when it's steady. See, it's quieter than I expected." "It usually is," he said. See, she looked at him. "Are you?" He seemed to consider the question with the same seriousness she'd given it. See, "Yeah," he said, "I am." A pause, more than I expected to be at this point in my life. See, I thought what I was doing was just maintaining. See, keeping the ranch going, keeping myself functional. See, I'd gotten used to that being enough. And now, he looked at the table. See, and now I come in for supper, and someone else has already thought about what needs to go in it based on what we used up this week, and I sit down and we talk about something real, and then I sleep, and I get up and I do it all again. See, and the thing that surprises me is I don't get tired of it." He raised his eyes to hers. See, I thought I would. After Mary died, I thought I was the kind of man who needed solitude to function. See, turns out I just needed the right company. Elowen looked at him steadily. "See, I love you," she said. It came out simpler than she'd expected, and also much more terrifying, and also unexpectedly a relief. See, like something she'd been carrying in her lungs that she'd finally exhaled. See, Silas looked at her the way he looked at things he was taking seriously. See, "I know," he said, and then, "I love you too," and he said it the way he said everything plainly, without decoration, because ornamentation had never been his habit, and it was exactly right because it meant exactly what it said and nothing extra. See, she didn't look away, and neither did he, and the kitchen was just the kitchen, warm and ordinary and theirs, and outside the May evening was going gold against the windows. And she thought, see, I said that out loud, and the world didn't end, and nobody took anything away. See, she thought, this is real. It was the first time she'd let herself think it without the qualifier. See, without the but at the end. Just, this is real. The summer arrived and brought with it work that expanded to fill every available hour, as ranch summers always did. See, the garden Elowen had started from seed, in late April came up better than she'd expected. She had her mother's hands for growing things, which was one of the few inheritances from that direction she was willing to claim. See, she put in tomatoes, beans, squash, and a long row of root vegetables that would keep through the winter. See, the work of it was physical and satisfying in the specific way of growing things you could see the results, and you had made them, and nobody could argue with a tomato. See, Silas watched her in the garden sometimes without commenting, which she'd learned was his version of paying attention. See, one evening in July, he came out with 2 cups of coffee and sat on the upturned crate at the edge of the garden while she worked, and he said, after a while, you should know that Grover asked about you today. See, she looked up from the beans. Asked what? He's got a woman coming through a family, actually. See, father and 3 girls. He's been told they're in a hard situation and won't make it to where they were heading before the summer's out. See, he wanted to know if we had room. Elowen stood up straight. See, she had dirt on both hands, and she pressed them together. See, room for what? Temporary shelter, Silas said, while the father sorts out work and lodging. See, a few weeks, maybe a month. She looked at the ranch house. See, she thought about the extra room, the room that had once been used for storage, and that she'd cleaned out in March for no particular reason, or for a reason she hadn't named yet. See, how old are the girls? She said, young. Grover wasn't sure. See, youngest might be 6 or 7. She thought about being young and in a hard situation and going somewhere that might or might not be safe. See, she thought about arriving at a place and having someone ask you what you wanted. See, she thought about the specific relief of being treated like you had a right to your own answer. See, yes, she said. Silas had been watching her. You didn't have to think about it long. See, I know what it's like, she said. She went back to the beans. See, tell Grover yes. Tell him they should come as soon as they need to. See, he picked up his cup. I already did, he said. I just wanted you to know. See, she looked at him sharply. He had the dry, quiet, non-smile she'd learned to read. See, I know you, he said. She looked back at the beans, and she pressed her lips together, and she was not going to be undone by a man who had told Grover yes before he'd asked her because he simply knew what she would say. See, she was not going to be undone by that. She was almost undone by that. See, the family a man named Aldous Crane, gaunt and worn-looking in the way of a man who has had a bad 18 months, and his 3 daughters, aged 6, 9, and 13 arrived on a Wednesday at the end of July in a wagon that had seen considerably better days. The girls were quiet in the specific way of children who have learned that being quiet is safer than not being quiet. Elowen knew that way of being quiet. She recognized it the way you recognize your own handwriting on someone else's paper. She showed Aldous Crane where to put the wagon, showed him the bunk in the small room off the barn where Silas had installed a proper cot, and then she took the girls inside. The youngest, whose name was Pearl, looked at the kitchen the way Elowen had looked at the ranch, the first time she'd seen it, with the careful attention of a child who is assessing whether this is a place where things can go wrong. Are you hungry? Elowen said. Pearl looked at her. Are we allowed? Elowen crouched down to be at the child's level. She looked at those eyes 6 years old, already measuring the cost of things. You're allowed, she said. There's plenty. You don't have to ask every time. Pearl looked at her for a long, still moment. Then she nodded. Elowen stood up and went to the stove, and the 3 girls settled slowly, gradually, into the chairs around the kitchen table, like birds landing on a branch they're not sure will hold them. By the time the food was ready, the 9-year-old Ada was watching Elowen with something that was cautious and curious in equal measure, and the 13-year-old, whose name was Fern, and who held herself with the carefully constructed composure of a girl who has been the responsible one for too long, was sitting upright at the table with her hands folded. See, Elowen looked at Fern and thought, "There you are. There's the one who's been doing the work." See, she set a plate in front of her without commentary and met her eyes, and Fern looked back with something that said she had been seen and wasn't sure how to handle it. See, that evening, after supper, after Aldous had come in and eaten and thanked her with the stiff formality of a man who was ashamed of needing what he'd been given. See, and after the girls were put in the extra room with the quilt and the lamp, Silas and Elowen sat on the porch. See, the oldest one, Elowen said, "Fern, she's been managing those younger two alone for a while." See, you could tell? Yes. She looked at the dark field. See, she sits like someone who can't put down a thing she's been carrying. See, Silas was quiet for a moment, then like someone I used to know. See, Elowen looked at him. He was looking at the field. See, not performing anything, just saying a true thing. See, she looked back at the field. "I want to talk to her," Elowen said. See, not about it directly, just I want her to know that someone sees it. See, that it's not invisible, Silas said. "Is that—" See, "It's a good instinct," he said. "Do it." She did it the next morning. See, she found Fern up before the younger girls, sitting at the kitchen table with nothing in her hands, which Elowen recognized as the posture of someone who had been told to rest and didn't know what to do with themselves. See, Elowen poured 2 cups of coffee, set one in front of Fern, and sat down. See, Fern looked at the coffee. "I'm not sure I'm supposed to." See, "It's fine," Elowen said. "I don't follow a lot of rules about who's supposed to drink coffee." See, Fern wrapped her hands around the cup. They were quiet for a moment. See, outside, something in the barn made a noise, one of the horses shifting. See, "You've been looking after your sisters a long time," Elowen said. See, not a question. Fern went still. "I'm not asking you to talk about it," Elowen said. See, "I'm just saying I see it, and I want you to know that you're allowed to not do that here. See, just for the time you're here, someone else can watch out for things." See, Fern looked at the table. Your father is doing his best," Elowen said. "See, I believe that. And so are you. But you're 13. She waited. See, and being 13 is a job by itself. Fern's jaw moved. See, she pressed her lips together. "I'm not going to make you cry before breakfast," Elowen said. See, Fern made a sound that was almost a laugh. It surprised her clearly. She put her hand over her mouth. See, "You can, though," Elowen added. "If you need to, Sue. I won't make anything of it." See, the girl sat there for a moment longer, and then she very quietly put her forehead down on her arms at the table, and her shoulders moved, and she cried in a way that was clearly unfamiliar to her controlled, not very loud. See, the crying of someone who didn't have experience with being allowed. See, Elowen sat with her. She didn't touch her. She didn't speak. See, she just stayed, which was all the situation asked. See, after a minute, Fern came back up. Her face was blotchy, and her composure was rebuilt with visible effort. See, "Sorry," she said. "Don't be." Fern picked up her coffee. See, "You were somewhere like this?" she said. Not challenging. See, genuinely asking. Elowen considered how to answer. See, "I was somewhere the other way," she said finally. See, "And then I ended up here. And it took me a while to figure out that I didn't have to be the same person here that I was there." See, Fern looked at her. "You don't have to figure it all out this week," Elowen said. "See, you've got time." The girl nodded. She drank her coffee. See, by the time Pearl and Ada came downstairs, Fern was sitting normally, and something around her eyes was slightly less old than it had been the day before. See, Silas came in for breakfast and looked at the 3 girls at the table and looked at Elowen at the stove and said nothing, because there was nothing to say. See, the Crane family stayed for 5 weeks. See, in that time, Aldous found work with a lumber operation 20 miles east that would keep him for the better part of the year, and he arranged temporary lodging for the family near the work site, and by the end of August, they were ready to go. See, the day they left, Pearl, who had in 5 weeks transformed from a silent See, watchful child into one who ran in the yard and talked at meals and left her shoes in 3 different places at once, stood in front of Elowen and said, very seriously, we can come back? See if you need to, Elowen said. Pearl considered this. See, what if we don't need to but want to? Elowen looked at this small, serious person. See, that counts too, she said. Pearl nodded and went to help with the wagon, and Fern, passing Elowen on her way out the door, stopped and said, thank you. See, for the morning. She said it quickly, not looking at Elowen, and then walked out before Elowen could respond, which was fine. See, some things didn't need a response. Silas watched the crane wagon until it was out of sight. See, we should talk about that room, he said. The extra room. See, it's been used twice now in 6 months. The storage I moved out of it is in the barn and doing fine there. He turned to look at her. See, if we're going to keep doing this, and I think we are, we should put a proper lock on the door from the inside. See, so whoever's in there feels safe. Elowen thought about Pearl asking if she was allowed to eat. See, yes, she said, and another blanket in the chest. See, and a lamp that works properly, the one in there flickers. See, I'll fix the lamp, he said. They went inside, and the house was quiet in the way it had been quiet before October, except that it was a different kind of quiet now. See, not empty, just resting. That autumn marked a year since the wagon ride from Hadley Crossing. See, a year since the sack of flour on the counter. A year since Elowen Mercer had stood on the wooden planks outside the trading post and heard, for the first time in her life, someone ask what she wanted. See, she thought about that sometimes. Not with the raw hurt she'd carried through the winter that had changed shape the way feelings do when you've had enough time and enough room to look at them sideways. See, it hadn't gone away. She didn't think it would go away entirely. See, but it had settled into something she could put her hand on without flinching. See, a scar, not a wound. She understood scars. She'd been carrying one on her arm since she was 15. See, she was in the garden in late September, pulling the last of the root vegetables before the hard frost came, when she heard a wagon on the road. See, not Silas, he was in the east field. She could see him from here. See, she straightened up and shaded her eyes. The wagon came through the gate, and she saw who was driving it, and she went very still. See, Martha Mercer had aged. Not collapsed into old age, she wasn't old, but the year had added something to her face that the previous years had not. See, she drove the wagon with the same straight-back determination she'd always had, and she pulled it to a stop in the yard and looked at Elowen from the seat. See, Elowen stood at the garden's edge with dirt on her hands. See, for a long moment neither of them spoke. Martha climbed down from the wagon with the careful movements of a woman whose knees had been giving her trouble. See, she stood in the yard and looked at Elowen, and then she looked at the garden, and then she looked at the house. See, this is a good piece of land, she said. It is, Elowen said. See, Martha looked back at her. She had the expression of a woman who had something to say and was sorting through a number of wrong ways to say it. See, Elowen watched her do this. She didn't help her. She'd done enough helping over the years. See, I should have come to the wedding, Martha said. Elowen waited. See, I told myself I hadn't been invited. That was Martha stopped. See, that was a reason I used because it was easier than the real one. See, what was the real one? Martha looked at the yard. See, she pressed her lips together in the way Elowen had pressed her own lips together 1,000 times, which was how she knew it was an inherited habit and where she'd inherited it from. See, I was ashamed, Martha said. The word came out flat and plain, the way hard things came out of people who hadn't practiced saying them. See, I didn't know how to stand in a room full of people and watch my daughter marry while they all knew, while everyone knew what I did. See, Elowen looked at her mother. Martha was looking at the garden again. See, you've got good rows, she said. Straight. Thank you. See, your father was good with rows too. A pause. You got it from him. See, it was a small thing, the smallest thing. Just a woman standing in a yard telling her daughter that she came from somewhere, that she had gotten something from someone, that she was a continuation of a line. See, Elowen's eyes went hot, and she blinked and pressed her own lips together. See, do you want to come inside? She said. Martha looked at her. See, something moved across her face that was too complicated to name. See, I don't want to intrude, she said. You're not intruding, Elowen said. See, and then, because it was true, you're my mother. See, Martha nodded, one sharp nod. She went to the wagon and tied the horse to the fence post, the efficiency of a woman who was not going to let herself feel things she couldn't manage while her hands were occupied, and then she followed Elowen inside. See, Silas came in from the east field 2 hours later to find Elowen and her mother at the kitchen table with coffee, talking about the east pasture fence. See, not the wedding, not October, not the sack of flour. See, just the fence and the winter coming and the cost of new wire. See, he stopped in the doorway and looked at them, at these two women with the same set to their mouths and the same way of holding a cup, and he said quietly, Mrs. See, Mercer. Good to see you. Martha looked at him. It was a long, assessing look of the kind that Elowen recognized from her own habit of watching people carefully before deciding what they were. See, you take care of her, Martha said. It was not a question and not exactly a request. See, it was the statement of a woman who was looking at something she had not protected and was handing it now, very late, to someone she was asking to do better. See, I do my best, Silas said. She takes care of herself too. See, Martha looked at Elowen. Elowen looked back. I know, Martha said. See, she always did. It was not a full accounting. It was not a resolution that tied everything up cleanly. See, it was a tired woman at a kitchen table saying something true a year and a month too late, and it was not enough, and it was also something. See, Elowen sat with both of those things at once, the not enough and the something, and found, to her own surprise, that they could both be true. See, that she could hold them both without one canceling the other. See, Martha stayed for supper. She helped without being asked. She moved around the kitchen with the practiced economy of a woman who'd cooked in difficult kitchens her whole life, and she complimented the root vegetable stew. See, and she told Silas that the south pasture fence looked sound, which was high praise from a woman who noticed fences. See, she left before dark. She hugged Elowen at the door briefly, stiffly, with the arms of a woman who had not hugged very much and wasn't sure she was doing it right, and Elowen hugged her back with the same awkwardness. See, and they stood in the yard in the September evening and did not say any of the things they had not yet found words for. See, I'll write more, Martha said. I'll write back, Elowen said. See, Martha climbed back into the wagon and drove out the gate and down the road, and Elowen stood watching until the wagon went around the bend and was gone. See, Silas came and stood beside her. All right, he said. See, she thought about it. See, she stood in the September air with the last of the garden smell coming up from the turned earth, and the sunflower switches and the light going down over the pasture, and she thought about October and January and May and August and tonight. See, and she thought about Martha's brief, clumsy arms around her and the words she always did. See, yeah, she said. She paused. Not everything. See, but enough for tonight. He put his arm around her shoulders. See, not dramatically. Just set it there, weight and warmth. See, they stood there until the light was gone and the first chill of autumn moved across the yard, and then they went inside, and the lamp was lit, and the door closed behind them against the dark. See, the second autumn settled over the ranch the way second autumns do, familiar now, recognizable in its rhythms, but different in the way that everything is different once you know what you're looking at. See, Elowen knew the sound of the wind coming down from the north before it arrived. See, she knew which boards on the porch expanded in the cold and which ones the horses spooked at when they popped. See, she knew that the cottonwoods along the creek turned yellow faster on the east side than the west, and she knew why the drainage, the way the soil held moisture differently on each bank. See, she knew these things because she'd been paying attention for a year, in the way you pay attention to a place when it belongs to you and you belong to it. See, she was 19 years old in October, and she did not feel 19, but she did not feel old. See, she felt like a person who had been in a long, narrow corridor for most of her life and had finally come out into a room with actual dimensions and was still sometimes startled by how far the walls were. See, The discovery happened on a Tuesday morning in the second week of October, when the frost was coming in earnest and the garden had been put to bed for the winter. See, she was standing in the kitchen. She'd been standing there for a few minutes without moving, which was unusual for her, and when Silas came in from the barn and found her like that, he stopped in the doorway. See, you all right, he said. She turned around. She looked at him across the kitchen. See, she had been trying to decide how to say this and had discovered that there was no particularly graceful way to say it. So she said it directly. I think I'm pregnant. See, Silas stood very still in the doorway. I think, she said again. See, I'm not certain, but the signs are all there, and I've been counting back, and she stopped. See, she pressed her hands together. I don't know how you feel about that. See, he crossed the kitchen in 5 steps and pulled her against him. Not carefully, just with the full weight of a man who is trying to contain a feeling that is too large for his face. See, his arms went around her, and she felt him breathe one long, slow breath, and then he stepped back and looked at her. See, his eyes were bright. He blinked it back the way he blinked things back. See, I feel good about that, he said. His voice was rough at the edges. See, I feel very good about that, she exhaled. See, she hadn't known she was holding her breath until she let it out. See, I was afraid, she said. Of what? She tried to name it. See, of it being too much. Of you not of this changing things in a way that she stopped. Because the fear was old and didn't entirely belong to this moment, and she was working on not letting old fears speak for present ones. See, I don't know. I was just afraid. He took her face in both hands, rough from the work, always rough from the work. And he looked at her directly, the way he had looked at her that first day outside the trading post when he'd asked what she wanted. See, this doesn't change what we are, he said. It adds to it. See, those are different things. She nodded. You're allowed to be afraid of it, he said. See, that's not wrong, but you're not facing it alone. See, you understand that? I'm getting better at understanding it, she said. See, he kissed her forehead and went to make coffee. And she sat down at the kitchen table and looked at the window and felt, layered on top of the fear and separate from it, something that was large and warm and required a minute to identify. See, joy. Actual joy, the uncomplicated kind underneath all the complicated kind. See, she sat with it and let it be there. She wrote to Martha the same week. See, the letter was longer than usual. She'd been writing longer letters to her mother over the course of the year. And Martha's letters back had grown longer too, haltingly. See, the way a person writes when they're out of practice with the idea that what they have to say is worth saying. See, she told Martha directly, no preamble, I'm spring. See, spring, I think. I wanted you to know. Martha's reply came faster than usual. See, 2 pages, which was the longest letter she'd ever written. See, the first page and a half was practical, what to eat, what not to carry, what signs to watch for, delivered in Martha's characteristically blunt way, as though the most useful thing a mother could do was arm you with information. See, the last half page was different. It said I was sick the whole winter with you. See, I don't know if you knew that. I never told you. I should have told you a lot of things I didn't tell you. See, you're going to be better at this than I was. Elowen read that last sentence 4 times. See, she folded the letter and put it in the box where she kept things she wanted to keep, and she went outside and stood in the cold air for a while and did not cry, mostly, and then she went back in and started supper. See, she told Ruth Arden the next time she saw her, which was at the trading post in late October, and Ruth had looked at her with an expression that was warm in the particular way of Ruth, not sentimental, just genuine, and said, "Good." See, the ranch needs more noise in it. I'm not sure Silas agrees with the noise part, Elowen said. See, he will, Ruth said, with the certainty of someone who has watched a great many men discover they were wrong about what they wanted. See, the pregnancy was not easy, and Elowen had not expected it to be. See, she was sick in the mornings through November and into December, which she handled with the practical annoyance of someone who has things to do and does not appreciate the interruption. See, Silas managed the mornings without commentary, without hovering, without doing the thing that well-meaning people did, which was treating an ill person as though they had also lost their mind. See, he adjusted what he cooked. He took over certain tasks without making a production of it. See, he showed up, quietly and consistently, in the particular way she had come to understand was his primary expression of love. See, she was grateful for the quiet of it. She had grown up around a woman who expressed care, when she expressed it at all, by telling you what was wrong with what you were doing. See, Silas expressed it by making sure you had what you needed and then getting out of your way, which was exactly what she needed and which she was still, 2 years in, occasionally surprised to receive. See, in December, she had a hard week. Not physically, the sickness had mostly passed by then, but mentally. See, in the specific way of a person who has been doing well for a long time and then encounters a patch of ground where old habits of thought come back up like weeds through frost-cracked soil. See, she found herself lying awake at night running calculations. See, what if something went wrong? What if she was not built for this? See, what if she turned into her mother, not the Martha who had sat at this kitchen table and said she always did, but the Martha of the ledger, the Martha who had looked at her own child and seen a cost? See, she said none of this to Silas for 3 days. Then on the 4th day, she sat down at the kitchen table at breakfast and said, "I need to tell you something I'm afraid to say." See, he put down his fork and waited. "I'm scared of becoming my mother," she said. See, not the version of her she's trying to be now. The version she was. She looked at the table. See, I know how she got there. I understand it now in a way I didn't when I was younger. See, she was alone and she was desperate and she had no room, no capacity left for anything beyond survival. See, and I understand how a person becomes that. I understand it so well it scares me because I can see the path. See, I can see exactly how you walk from having nothing to hoarding yourself so completely that you can't even see the people in front of you. See, Silas was quiet for a moment. "What are you most afraid of?" he said. See, not "don't worry," not "that won't happen," just "what specifically are you afraid of?" See, she looked up. "That I'll start keeping score," she said. See, "that I'll be tired and scared, and I'll start measuring what I give against what comes back, and running a deficit," and she pressed her lips together. See, "I've seen what happens to people who do that long enough." See, "You've also seen what happens to people who decide not to," he said. See, Ruth. "Ruth," he agreed, "and you already." Every time that Crane family comes to mind, he leaned forward on the table. See, Elowen. "Your mother was alone, completely alone for years, with no one to share the weight of anything. See, that's not your situation. I know that. Do you know it all the way down?" See, she sat with that. She tried to know it all the way down, to let it past the defended places, through the scar tissue. See, "I'm working on it," she said honestly. "Then that's enough," he said. See, "You're not going to become someone you're afraid of becoming while you're still afraid of becoming them." See, the people who turn into their worst selves don't see it happening. See, you see it. That's the difference. She looked at him across the table. See, "You're not going to be alone in this," he said. "Not one day of it." See, she nodded. She picked up her fork. The conversation was not a magic solution. She did not believe in magic solutions. She'd been skeptical of those since childhood, but it was the right conversation. See, and having the right conversation with the right person at the right time was more valuable than most things she could name. See, winter moved slowly as it always did, but it moved. See, January came, and with it the halfway point, and Elowen felt the baby move for the first time Thursday afternoon, when she was sitting by the fire with a book she wasn't really reading. See, she sat very still and waited, and it happened again, a small, strange interior thing, and she said aloud to the empty room, "Oh." See, just that. See, she put the book down and sat with her hand pressed flat against her middle, and the fire went on burning, and the house went on being quiet around her. And she thought, there is someone in here who has not yet been taught that they are a burden. See, there is someone in here who is at this moment entirely innocent of the idea that they owe anything for the space they take up. See, she was going to keep it that way. That was a decision, not a feeling. See, she understood the difference. Feelings moved through you And sometimes they told you true things, and sometimes they told you things shaped by fear or habit or the particular darkness of 3 in the morning. See, decisions were different. Decisions were things you made when you were clear-eyed, things you could come back to when the feelings were loud. See, she decided this child will not grow up counting themselves against the household. See, she decided this child will know that love is not something you earn. See, she held on to those decisions through the rest of the winter. See, Silas, who did not have a great deal of experience with expectant women, but had a considerable amount of experience with things he didn't know how to do and did anyway, quietly built a cradle in the barn over the course of February. See, he did it over several weeks in the evenings, and she knew he was doing it, and he knew she knew, and neither of them mentioned it directly, which was a kind of intimacy she had come to treasure, the kind that doesn't require narration. See, she saw it for the first time on a Saturday morning when she went to the barn for something else entirely, and it was sitting there on the workbench, sanded smooth, but not yet finished. See, she stood looking at it for a long time. See, it was plain Silas built things for function, not for show, but the joints were good and the proportions were right, and someone had spent careful time on the piece of wood that curved at each end to make it rock. See, she went back inside without saying anything. That evening at supper, she said, "The cradle is good." See, he looked up. "It needs a coat of oil yet." "I know." "See, it's still good." He looked at his plate, and the corner of his mouth moved. "See, I wasn't sure about the curve at the ends. Took me 3 tries." "See, it's right," she said. "It rocks the right amount." See, he nodded. "That's what I was going for." They ate their supper. See, she thought, this is what it looks like. A man who makes a cradle and tries 3 times to get the curve right and doesn't mention it. See, a woman who sees it and knows what it means and says it's good. See, this is what it looks like when 2 people love each other without any performance of it. See, she had not known before Silas that love could look like that. See, she'd known the word. She'd seen versions of the thing. See, but she hadn't known it could be this particular shape, steady and unflashy and daily, like good fence work or a properly drained field. See, something you only understood if you knew what it took. See, March came in cold and reluctant, and then in the last week broke open suddenly into warmth the way the season did, on that part of the frontier, not gradual, not polite. See, just a wall of warm air moving through, and the world deciding it was spring now, whether winter was ready or not. See, Ruth Arden came in March. She'd been coming more regularly since the pregnancy, not hovering, just present, in the way of a woman who understood that presence was different from interference. See, she brought things when she came. See, practical things, a worn but excellent receiving blanket from her own children's infancy, a herbal preparation for the later weeks that she said with characteristic directness probably worked, and possibly was just something to do with your hands. See, she sat at the kitchen table and talked to Elowen the way she talked to her at the dry goods store directly, without softening things unnecessarily, and this was exactly what Elowen needed. See, "Are you frightened?" Ruth asked one afternoon in mid-March. See, "Yes," Elowen said. "Good," Ruth said. "Women who aren't frightened haven't thought about it clearly." See, "That's not particularly comforting." "I wasn't trying to comfort you." See, "I was trying to be accurate." Ruth poured herself more coffee. See, "You're strong and you're sensible, and you have a good man who will not fall apart when things are hard, which is not a given. Let me tell you, it is not a given." She set the pot down. "See, you'll manage." "Will is a sturdy word," Elowen said. "See, it's the right one." Ruth looked at her. "You managed everything else they put in front of you." See, "This is harder, and it's the best kind of hard." See, "The kind with something extraordinary on the other side." See, Elowen looked at the table. "My mother wrote to me," she said. See, "She said she was sick the whole winter. She was pregnant with me and never told me." See, Ruth was quiet. "I keep thinking about that," Elowen said. See, "She was alone and sick, and she had no one to say that's enough for today. Rest now." See, she just kept going because that was what there was. She pressed her hand against the table. See, "I'm angry about it." Which is strange because I'm also not angry at her anymore, not in the old way. See, but I'm angry that she had to do it alone. That seems like a waste. See, of her, of what she could have been. Ruth looked at her for a moment. See, are you going to tell her that? Elowen considered it. See, not yet, she said. Maybe eventually. It would probably do her good to hear it. See, it would probably do her good, Elowen agreed. But I have to be ready to say it right. See, if I say it wrong, it sounds like blame, and you don't want to blame her. See, I want to tell her I understand, Elowen said, that I see what happened to her. See, that it wasn't that she wasn't a bad woman. She was a woman who ran out of room. She looked out the window. See, I want to tell her that I have room, and she can come into it when she's ready. See, but I have to find the right words for that. Ruth looked at her for a long moment, with the expression she reserved for things she approved of, but didn't want to make a production of. See, you've grown up, she said. I was already grown up, Elowen said. See, you were grown in the way people grow when they're forced to, Ruth said. See, that's different from this. This is she paused, which was unusual for Ruth. See, this is a person who has chosen who they are. That takes longer. See, Elowen looked at the table. Thank you, she said. See, she said it quietly, because quiet was how she said the things she meant most. See, Ruth waved it away. Drink your tea, she said. It tastes terrible, but it helps. See, the baby arrived on the 4th day of April, which was a Wednesday, and in the morning, when the light was coming in at the eastern windows, at the long, low angle of early spring. See, it was not a fast labor, and it was not an easy one, and there were several hours in the middle of it when Elowen understood, in her body, and not just her mind, why her mother had never spoken about it. See, some things were too large for language, some things you only understood from inside them. See, Ruth was there. Silas was there, and then not there, and then there again, which was the shape of his presence through it close when she needed him, out of the way when the work required it. See, steady throughout in the way of a man who deals with hard things by simply not leaving. See, when it was over, and the room had settled, and the small, outraged, red-faced person in her arms had moved from screaming to the particular hiccuping quiet of a newborn deciding whether the world was acceptable. See, Elowen lay in the bed and held her daughter and looked at her. See, she'd thought she would cry. She didn't, not right away. See, she just looked. Her daughter had Silas's long fingers, which she would not have predicted but which seemed immediately, obviously, correct. See, she had Elowen's nose, which she was going to have opinions about eventually. See, she had the standard newborn's expression of exhausted bewilderment, which was also immediately obviously correct, given the circumstances. See, Silas sat on the edge of the bed and looked at both of them. See, he did not say anything for a long time. Then he said very quietly, "She's got your determination already." See, look at her jaw. Elowen looked at the jaw. The jaw was, in fact, set in a way that suggested her daughter already had a position on several things. See, "Lord help us," Ruth said from across the room, which was the closest to sentiment that Ruth was likely to get. See, "What are you going to call her?" Silas asked. They had talked about names over the winter, the way you talk about names when you don't want to commit until you've seen the face, because names were tricky. See, because the wrong name was a cage, and the right name was a gift, and you couldn't always tell from the outside which one you were holding. See, they had talked about several. They had not settled. See, Elowen looked at her daughter. The newborn's unfocused gaze moved toward the light, the way all new things move toward light. "See, Clara," she said. It came out certain. She hadn't planned it, it arrived, the way the right things sometimes arrived, without announcement. "See, Clara Rourke." Silas said it to himself, quietly, trying the shape of it. See, then he nodded. "Yeah," he said. "That's right." Ruth made a sound of agreement and said she'd make tea and left them alone, which was the most tactful thing Ruth had done in perhaps their entire acquaintance, and Elowen appreciated it deeply. See, she looked at Clara. Clara looked at the light. Elowen thought about a girl standing in a trading post trying to find something in a sack of flour. See, she thought about a wagon and a door and 2 chairs and a bookshelf with red books. See, she thought about a bowl of warm water and a wool blanket and a man who had looked at her across a trading post counter and refused to negotiate over her like livestock. See, she thought about a barn and a yes and a ring and a kitchen table and arguments about water rights and a cradle that took 3 tries to get the curve right. See, she thought about her mother saying she always did. See, she thought about all of it, and she looked at her daughter in the April light, and she felt the weight of the thing she was handing forward. See, not a curse, not a debt, a choice. She was going to give this child the thing she had not been given early enough, the unambiguous, unearned, unconditional understanding that her presence was not a problem to be solved. See, that she did not have to work her way to worth, that she was already worth everything, had been worth everything from the first moment, and that was that, and the ledger was closed. See, she's going to know, Elowen said aloud. Silas looked at her. See, she's going to know that she belongs, Elowen said. See, from the beginning. Not something she has to earn. See, just a fact she grows up inside of. Silas looked at Clara. See, that's the plan, he said. I mean it. I know you mean it. See, so do I. He looked at Elowen. We're both working from scratch on this. See, neither of us had a great model, she agreed. See, so we'll get some things wrong, yes, and we'll fix them when we do. See, she looked at him. You're very calm about this. I'm terrified, he said. See, I'm just calm about being terrified. She almost laughed. See, she was too tired to laugh properly, but the feeling was there. See, that's a reasonable approach, she said. It's the only one I've got, he said. See, Clara made a small sound that was not exactly a complaint and not exactly not a complaint. See, Elowen adjusted her hold and Clara subsided, and Silas put his arm around Elowen's shoulders, the same weight and warmth she'd felt on the porch in September. See, the same unceremonious steadiness, and the 3 of them sat in the April morning light and were improbably and thoroughly, and without any particular fanfare, a family. See, the months that followed were hard in the way that all new things were hard. See, Clara was not a peaceful infant she had, as Ruth had predicted from the set of her jaw opinions about everything, and she expressed them loudly and at inconvenient hours. See, Elowen was more tired than she had ever been in her life, including the years of pre-dawn farm labor, because tired from work and tired from a newborn were different species of exhaustion entirely. See, she did not feel beautiful or capable or any of the things she had heard women describe. See, she felt wrung out and occasionally irrational and deeply, stubbornly in love with a person who could not yet do anything useful and did not care whether Elowen had slept. See, Silas took night shifts without being asked. Not all of them, they weren't both going to be destroyed. That served no one but enough, and the enough mattered. See, he got up in the dark without complaint, which Elowen would remember for the rest of her life as one of the more significant things he'd ever done for her. See, she had a bad week in June. Clara was 2 months old, the work of the ranch was in full summer swing, and Elowen hit a wall not of despair, exactly. See, but of the particular depletion that comes when you've been running on short sleep and high stakes for an extended period, and your reserves are simply gone. See, she sat at the kitchen table one morning while Clara slept, and she did not do anything. See, she just sat. She didn't make coffee, didn't start breakfast, didn't move. See, Silas came in and found her and sat down across from her and said nothing for a minute. See, then he said, "What do you need?" "I don't know," she said. See, "All right, what don't you need?" She thought about it. See, "I don't need to make any decisions today." "Then you won't," he said. See, "I'll handle things today. The fence on the north." See, "It'll wait. The supply order should go out." Elowen, he looked at her steadily. "See, I've got it. Go back to bed. I've got Clara too." See, she looked at him. She looked at this man who had once told her, in a kitchen she hadn't yet learned to feel at home in, that her worth didn't go down when she sat still. See, who had said it, and then shown her, month by month, that he meant it. See, who was still, 2 years and 1 daughter later, saying and showing the same thing. See, "I'll go back to bed for 2 hours," she said. "Take 3. See, 2. He sighed, the sigh of a man who has learned that arguing with her about the small things was not a productive use of his time. See, 2, he said. Go, she went. She slept. See, she woke up 2 hours later to the sound of Silas in the kitchen, and Clara not crying, which meant he had managed both, and she lay in the bed and listened to the sounds of her household for a moment before getting up. See, she thought, I have been held up today, not rescued. See, held up, by someone who didn't need me to be anything other than a person having a hard week. See, she thought, this is what I want Clara to see, not a mother who never struggles. See, a mother who gets held up sometimes, and a father who does the holding, and both of them doing the same for each other without keeping score. See, she got up and went downstairs and took Clara from Silas and said, thank you, and meant it. See, you were that tired, he said. I was that tired, she said. See, he nodded and went to the barn, and she sat with her daughter in the summer kitchen and felt, despite the tiredness and the hard week, inexplicably like herself. See, by the end of summer, Clara was rolling over with great self-satisfaction and grabbing everything in reach and laughing at things that were not obviously funny. See, which was a habit she had clearly gotten from no one in the household and which delighted Elowen unreasonably. See, she was a round, determined, loud baby who had very clear preferences and communicated them without ambiguity. And Elowen found herself thinking, more than once, that she understood where the determination came from. See, Martha came in August when Clara was 4 months old. See, she arrived unannounced, which was Martha's way. She did not trust that announced visits would actually happen. A reasonable skepticism that Elowen recognized as a side effect of a life where plans had a habit of falling apart. See, she drove into the yard on a Tuesday morning, and Elowen looked up from the porch where she was sitting with Clara and saw the wagon and felt something that had gotten simpler over the years, not complicated anymore. See, just the particular feeling of seeing your mother. See, Martha climbed down from the wagon and walked to the porch and looked at the baby. See, Clara looked back at Martha with the focused intensity of an infant who has not yet learned to be polite about staring. See, Martha said nothing for a moment. Then she said, she's got the Mercer forehead. See, I know, Elowen said. I'd have preferred otherwise. See, Martha looked at her. There was something in Martha's face that Elowen could not quite name, something large that the woman was holding at a careful distance from her own expression. See, can I hold her, Martha said. Elowen handed Clara over. See, Martha held the baby with the arms of a woman who had not held a baby in 19 years, but whose body remembered the weight. See, Clara assessed her grandmother with that same focused stare, and then, for reasons best known to herself, grabbed Martha's finger with considerable force and did not let go. See, Martha looked down at the small hand around her finger. See, something in her face came apart, briefly, and then was put back together, but not quite as tightly as before. See, she's strong, Martha said. Her voice was rough at the edges. See, very, Elowen said. They sat on the porch, the 3 of them 4, when Silas came up from the south field at noon and nodded to Martha and got a nod back, which was the most warmth those 2 were likely to exchange, and which was, see, all things considered, a significant improvement from the trading post. See, Martha stayed for the afternoon. She held Clara more than she sat without her. See, she did not say many significant things she was not, and would never be, a woman who said many significant things, but she watched Elowen with the careful eyes of a woman doing an accounting she owed. See, before she left, she stood at the wagon and looked at Elowen and said, "You're managing this better than I did." See, Elowen looked at her. She had been waiting for the right moment for months, the right words, and she understood now that there would not be a perfect moment. See, there was only this a Tuesday afternoon in August, a yard, 2 women who had hurt each other by different methods, and who were finding their way back to something that might not be what they'd lost, but was something new. See, something they were building instead of inheriting. See, I have more than you had, Elowen said. That's not a judgment. See, it's just true, you were alone and I'm not. Martha looked at the wagon. See, I know that. You weren't a bad woman, Elowen said. See, you were a woman who ran out of room. There's a difference. She paused. See, I see that now. Martha was quiet for a long moment. See, I had room, she said. I made choices that made it smaller. She said it with the difficulty of someone who has spent a long time not saying a thing and is finding that saying it is harder than they expected and also somehow less devastating. See, I don't say that till she stopped. I'm sorry, Elowen. See, for what I made smaller, it was not a full accounting. See, it probably never would be, but it was real, and it was hers, and she had said it while looking at her daughter, which was the bravest version of it. See, Elowen crossed the yard and put her arms around her mother, who was stiff for a moment and then not stiff, and they stood there in the August heat and held each other with the imperfect arms of two women who were both. See, in their different ways, still figuring out how to do it. See, come more often, Elowen said. I will, Martha said. See, she meant it. Elowen could tell. She'd learned over the years to tell when her mother meant something. See, Martha drove out the gate, and Elowen stood in the yard watching her go, and this time she did not watch the road after the wagon disappeared. See, she turned around and walked back to the porch, where Silas had picked up Clara and was standing with her on his hip, watching Elowen come back across the yard. See, Clara reached toward Elowen as she approached, which was something she'd started doing recently, the reaching, and Elowen took her and settled her against her side and stood next to Silas in the August afternoon. See, that went well, he said. Reasonably, she said. See, for the two of you, reasonably as well. Don't push it, she said. See, he made the sound that was almost a laugh. Clara grabbed Elowen's collar and held on. See, the years that followed were not simple and they were not quiet, but they were good in the way that things are good when they're honest about what they are. See, the ranch grew not dramatically, not into something unrecognizable, but steadily, the way a thing grows, when two people who pay attention are working on it together. See, the south pasture was expanded. A second barn was raised in the third year, smaller than the first, for the equipment that had been getting rained on. See, the garden that Elowen had started in her first spring grew into something that fed them through winter with plenty left to share. See, the room off the main house was used 6 more times in 4 years. See, sometimes for days, once for nearly 3 months. A woman with 2 boys who was leaving a situation that had become dangerous. See, an older man who had been working a ranch farther west that went under and needed a place to land while he found the next thing. See, a young couple, barely older than Elowen had been when she'd walked into Hadley Crossing, who were trying to get somewhere and couldn't get there in one movement. See, Elowen turned no one away who needed it, and Silas supported this without reservation, which was one of the ways she had come to measure a person what they did with the room they had when someone needed it. See, Clara grew the way children grew on frontier ranches, sturdy and observant and unimpressed by things that didn't deserve impression, with a laugh that seemed borrowed from some louder relative nobody could identify. See, she learned to walk in the kitchen and to run in the yard, and to be careful around the horses at a younger age than Elowen had expected. See, because it turned out that Clara's determination extended to figuring things out before anyone had thought to teach her. See, she was 4 years old when she found the scar on her mother's arm. See, they were sitting in the kitchen on a winter afternoon, and Clara had climbed into Elowen's lap with a book she wanted read, and in the course of settling in, she'd pushed up Elowen's sleeve and found the long, twisted scar from wrist to below the elbow, and she looked at it with the direct attention she gave everything. See, what's that? Clara said. Elowen looked at it. She had spent so many years keeping it covered. See, she had covered it in winter and summer, and had worn long sleeves through weather that didn't call for them, and had kept it from every casual eye for reasons that had started as her mother's instruction, and had become, over the years, habit. See, she still covered it sometimes. She wasn't finished with that habit entirely. See, but here was Clara, 4 years old, looking at her arm with nothing but curiosity. See, a scar, Elowen said. I burned my arm when I was 15. See, does it hurt? Not anymore. Clara reached out and touched it with one small finger. See, it's bumpy, she said. Yes, it looks like the bark on the old cottonwood. See, Elowen looked at her arm. She had never thought of it that way. See, she had never thought of it as anything except a thing to be covered, a mark of an accident, a visible imperfection that made people uncomfortable. See, but Clara was 4 and had not learned yet to see scars as problems. See, you're right, Elowen said. It does. Clara accepted this as settled, pulled the sleeve back down with small, efficient hands because the kitchen was cold, and pointed at the book. See, read now, she said. Elowen read the book. She would think about that moment later, the way she thought about other moments that had shifted something without announcing themselves. See, she would think about 4-year-old fingers on an old burned scar and the matter-of-fact declaration that it looked like tree bark, and she would think about how long she had spent being ashamed of a thing that was simply part of her. See, part of the record, part of the particular shape of a person who had been in difficult places and come through them, and was now on a ranch in the rolling frontier grassland, reading a book to her daughter on a winter afternoon. See, she had been so many things in the accounting of other people. See, a burden, a bargaining chip, a scandal, a cautionary tale. See, a surprise, a capable woman, a good wife, a neighbor who kept a room ready. See, a daughter who had learned to come back. But the accounting of other people, she had come to understand, was their accounting. See, it was not the record. The record was this: a woman who had been asked what she wanted and had not known the answer, who had learned the answer over years of quiet and difficulty and love and work, who was still learning it. See, who would probably be learning it for the rest of her life. See, that was not a flaw in the story. That was the story. See, on a spring morning when Clara was 5, Elowen stood on the porch in the early light before anyone else was up. See, the frost was just coming off the grass. The cottonwoods along the creek were putting out their first thin green. See, a pair of birds she'd never learned the name of were doing something complicated in the fence post nearest the garden. See, she stood with her coffee and her bare feet on the porch boards and looked at the land that was hers. See, not hers the way things were hers when she was a girl, not hers to manage, not hers to justify, not hers as a debt or a duty. See, hers in the simple, unargued way that a life belongs to a person who has actually lived it. See, she had planted in this soil and fixed this fence and argued about these water rights and opened to strangers and closed it against cold and stood on this porch in every season until the porch and the seasons and the soil were part of what she was made of. See, she heard Silas inside the familiar sound of him starting the stove, and then, a minute later, the smaller sound of Clara, who had recently developed the habit of waking up the moment her father did, as though she had sensors. See, Clara appeared at the porch door in her nightgown and bare feet and looked at Elowen. See, "You're up early," Clara said, with the slightly accusatory air of a 5-year-old who considered herself the early riser of the household. "See, I am," Elowen agreed. Clara came and stood beside her on the porch, also looking at the land, which was a thing she did. She had her father's habit of watching things. "See, what are you thinking about?" Clara said. Elowen looked at the frost on the grass, the green on the cottonwoods, the birds on the fence post. "See, about how far things have come," she said. It was not quite an answer a 5-year-old needed, but Clara nodded as though she found it satisfactory. "See, Daddy's making oatmeal," Clara said. "I know. I like the brown sugar on top." "See, I know that too." Clara took her mother's hand, the unscarred one, and then the scarred one, with the same casual acceptance of both, and held on to it, and they stood there in the spring morning. See, and inside the house, Silas was making oatmeal, and the stove was lit, and the door was unlocked, and the room off the hall had clean blankets in the chest. See, Elowen looked at the land and felt not completion, because she wasn't finished, not resolution in the tidy sense, because life didn't resolve in the tidy sense, but something true and earned and entirely her own. See, she had been counted as a cost once. See, she had learned, in the years since, that the counting had been wrong, and that the person doing the counting had not known how to see past her own fear, and that this was a tragedy for both of them, but was not the ending of either of them. See, the ending, or rather, the not ending, the ongoing thing that was better than any ending, was this porch. See, this child's hand, this land, this man making oatmeal. See, this room with clean blankets, this home that nobody had to earn the right to enter. See, she had not built it alone, and she had not built it easily, and she had made mistakes in the building and would make more, and none of that was the point. See, the point was that she had built it. The girl who had stood in the trading post, not knowing what she wanted, had found out. See, she wanted this. She had chosen this, and every morning she woke up and chose it again.